Highgate Hill is a bustling suburb located in the heart of Brisbane, Queensland, Australia. With a population of over 6,000 residents, it's a vibrant and diverse community that boasts a mix of old and new architecture, from traditional Queenslander homes to modern apartment complexes. The landscape is hilly and offers breathtaking views of the Brisbane River and the surrounding cityscape. The area is known for its leafy streets, parks, and gardens, making it a popular destination for families and nature lovers. However, as the case of the McKulkin family shows, even a bright and busy city like Brisbane can have a dark underbelly. Despite the beauty and charm of Highgate Hill, the case of the McKulkin family serves as a stark reminder that evil can strike anywhere, at any time. Barbara McKulkin, born in 1940 in New South Wales, was a vibrant and resilient woman who faced life's challenges head-on. In June 1960, Barbara married Billy McKulkin, a small-time crook and debt collector. They had 2 daughters, Leanne and Vicky. Despite the hardships that came with Billy's unpredictable lifestyle, Barbara remained steadfast in her commitment to her family. She navigated the complexities of their relationship with unwavering strength and grace. Despite growing up in a difficult era, Barbara always kept her head held high and worked tirelessly to provide for her 2 daughters. She was a woman of many talents, from cooking and sewing to providing an education for her children. She made sure they were well-fed, well-clothed, and well-educated. Barbara truly was the epitome of a great mother. She often worked long hours at a milk bar, serving customers with a smile despite the exhaustion that she felt. Meanwhile, Billy's criminal activities only continued to escalate, causing Barbara more stress and worry. She tried her best to shield her daughters from their father's dangerous associates and activities, but it was a constant battle. Billy was hardly ever home, and when he was often in a foul mood, causing tension in the household. Despite this, Barbara never gave up on her husband and tried her best to keep the family together. Barbara didn't have it easy. Living in a city like Brisbane in the 1970s, which was plagued with kidnappings, murders, and drug overdoses, made life even harder for her. According to Peter Campbell, a close friend of Barbara, she was always trying to get a better job. She just lived for the kids and did a great job at that. She did a great job as a mom. Peter's stepdaughter often had sleepovers at the McKulkin house with Leanne and Vicky, who attended the same school, Uranga State School. As time went on, the financial pressure only mounted, and Barbara struggled to make ends meet, and the darkness of Billy's criminal activities eventually caught up to the family. Billy the Mouse McKulkin was a notorious figure in Brisbane's underworld during the 1970s. Born in Queensland on March 15, 1940, Billy was a small, wiry man with a cunning mind and a quick temper. He was known to be a debt collector, getting money from the bookies and massage parlors, and was willing to do whatever it took to make a quick buck. Despite his family responsibilities, Billy's criminal activities continued to escalate, and he became more deeply involved with the Clockwork Orange gang. Billy was determined to move up in the underworld and become a powerful figure. He was known to be violent and unpredictable, and his involvement with the gang only made him more dangerous. The Clockwork Orange gang was a notorious group of thugs in the criminal underworld of Brisbane in the 1970s. Named after the famous book and movie, they were a group of young men who believed in living fast and making easy money. Along with Billy McKulkin, the gang consisted of Vincent O'Dempsey, Peter Hall, and Gary Shorty Dubois, among others. They were known to target clubs and businesses, demanding protection money in exchange for keeping them safe from harm. The gang had a reputation for using violence and intimidation to get what they wanted, and they were not afraid to use extreme measures to achieve their goals. Gangs would often target clubs because they knew they would get protection money. It was a simple equation: pay up, or your club would get bombed. One of the clubs they targeted was the Whiskey A Go-Go. On the night of March 8, 1973, the Whiskey A Go-Go Club was bursting with life as Brisbaneites, business people, and even police officers all gathered inside to enjoy the vibrant atmosphere and loud music. But as the night wore on, things took a sinister turn. At precisely 2:10 a.m., 2 drums of diesel fuel were brutally thrown into the foyer of the club, shattering the peaceful atmosphere with a loud bang. Within moments, the drums were ignited by a lit torch that was thrown through the open door. The burning diesel fuel spread quickly and sent a plume of carbon monoxide up to the club's main room on the first floor. The heat was intense, and the thick smoke made it difficult to see. The stairs were smeared with large quantities of grease, making it impossible for the patrons to escape. The door of the fire escape was also greased, which made it slippery and challenging to open. As the fire raged on, panic-stricken patrons tried to flee the building, but the flames had already blocked their way. The heat and smoke became unbearable, and 15 people lost their lives, including waitresses, musicians, and even an off-duty police officer. The tragedy shocked the city, and a circular plaque, ringed with the names of the 15 dead, still sits outside the Amelia Street doorway in Fortitude Valley, serving as a stark reminder of the horrific events that occurred that fateful night. About 100 patrons, bar staff, and entertainers had been inside the club at the time of ignition. Many had to escape by jumping from broken windows onto an awning and dropping 15 feet to the ground. As the investigation into the fire began, police quickly identified 2 prime suspects, John Andrew Stewart and James Richard Finch. They were charged and eventually convicted of the bombing, but many believed they were framed, and an inquest that could have widened the investigation was stopped after they were charged, even though it was clear that others were involved. The Whiskey A Go-Go fire was a tragedy that shook the city of Brisbane to its core. The night of the Whiskey A Go-Go fire, the flames didn't just engulf the club, but they also cast a dark shadow over Barbara McKulkin's heart. She had overheard the Clockwork Orange gang discussing their plans to bomb nightclubs, including the Whiskey A Go-Go, during one of their boozy meetings at Billy's home. Little did she know that her husband was deeply involved with the gang, and his actions would soon have devastating consequences. Barbara discussed this with John Ryan, a friend and security guard at the Whiskey A Go-Go, who agreed to help her disappear and reveal all the secrets of the infamous Clockwork Orange gang. The plan was to document everything on camera and recordings, and bring justice to the victim of the gang's ruthless activities. But as the night went on, John received no call. Barbara had put the plan on hold to let her daughters Leanne and Vicky attend a birthday party. The night of January 16, 1974, was filled with anticipation and fear as John Ryan, the security guard at the Whiskey A Go-Go Club, waited anxiously for Barbara McKulkin's call. Meanwhile, in the streets of Brisbane, the McKulkin family's fate was already sealed. That evening, her daughters Vicky and Leanne went to Junine's 10th birthday party across the street, while Barbara was alone at home. Neighborhood friends Janet and Junine Gayton saw Vince and Shorty, also known as Vincent O'Dempsey and Gary Dubois, members of the Clockwork Orange gang, with Mrs. McKulkin at their Highgate Hill house, along with an orange Valiant Charger parked out the front. Dubois later drove the Charger to Peter Hall's house in Chermside, where he confessed that he and O'Dempsey were on the piss at the McKulkin's house, and he was going back for more. As the night went on, Leanne left for home from the birthday party alone at 8:30 p.m. A neighbor watched her as she entered the house. 2 hours later, around 10:15 p.m., Vicky returned home as well. But this was the last time anyone ever saw the McKulkin family alive. On January 18, 1974, the eerie emptiness of the McKulkins' home was the first sign that something was amiss. Billy McKulkin, Barbara's estranged husband, who had been involved with another woman, arrived to find the house abandoned. The sewing table held a dress mid-stitch. Barbara's purse was perched on the fridge, and the cats were locked away in the bathroom. The family had vanished without a trace. Detective Sergeant Virginia Gray revealed that Billy immediately suspected his criminal acquaintances, Shorty and Vince, and confronted them with the information he had gathered from one of the girls at the birthday party. But the suspects fled town within days of the confrontation, going into hiding. Despite being prime suspects, it took until April 2, 1980 for the duo to be charged with 3 counts of murder. However, in 1981, the case was dropped for lack of sufficient evidence, and the 2 men walked free. For the next 34 years, the case remained unsolved, until in 2014, when new evidence emerged following the reopening of the case that year. Apparently, the Queensland Police Cold Case Unit got a tip-off that hinted that O'Dempsey and Dubois might have confessed their involvement in the murder to trusted criminal associates. Detective Sergeant Virginia Gray and Detective Inspector Mick Dowie reopened the cold case of the McKulkin murders in 2014. They had little to go with until the tip-off was made. With that new information, Queensland Crime and Corruption Commission, known as the CCC, called in Peter Hall, a former criminal associate of Shorty Dubois. The CCC is an independent Queensland government entity which has the power to investigate major crimes and corruption by using coercive powers to force witnesses to give evidence, denying them the right to silence. During the interrogation, Peter Hall admitted involvement in several crimes of the past. Hall admitted to the firebombing of the Torino's nightclub in February 1973, an unsolved arson in which no one was killed. He admitted to doing break-ins as a petty criminal with his fellow Clockwork Orange gang members Gary Shorty Dubois, Tommy Hamilton, and Keith Meredith. However, when the CCC pressed on, he denied any knowledge of any role that Shorty Dubois may have played in the abduction and murder of Barbara McKulkin and her daughters. What was significant about that denial was that Hall was not actually being specifically questioned at that point about the McKulkin disappearance. Also, during the interrogation, Hall let slip a comment. He said, "Shorty went missing the following day." This comment caught the attention of Detective Sergeant Virginia Gray, who realized the significance of what Hall had inadvertently revealed when she listened back to a recording of his CCC interrogation a week later. She believed that Hall was flagging that he knew Shorty Dubois had gone missing after one unspecified but crucially important day. The detectives then realized that Peter might know what happened to the McKulkin family, but didn't want to talk due to the criminal code of silence. Who would blame him? From his experience as a petty criminal in his youth, Hall was bitterly skeptical of police. He believed they were the enemy and was well aware of corrupt police officers from the bad old days of the Queensland Police Force, who were systematically bribed by organized criminals. So Detective Virginia Gray and Mick Dowie had to win Hall's confidence and trust. And slowly, but surely, they did. Peter Hall decided to break the code of silence and reveal what he was told by Dubois just 2 days after the murders. He had kept this secret for 40 years, but he decided to publicly admit his criminal past and reveal what he knew. According to Hall's confession, Barbara McKulkin and her 2 daughters were abducted from their home on January 16, 1974. They were taken to a remote bushland area near Warwick, 2 hours southwest of Brisbane, where O'Dempsey separated Barbara from her children and strangled her to death. Dubois then assaulted at least one of the girls, and both children were murdered and buried with their mother. However, their bodies were never found. Gary Dubois allegedly recounted that they had waited for the sun to rise so they could see what they were doing, and as the light filtered through the trees, they dug holes to bury the bodies. But it was the sight of the lifeless bodies lying there in the morning sunlight that unnerved him the most. In the aftermath of the unspeakable horror, he couldn't get out of the place fast enough. Hall describes Dubois as a victim of circumstance, forced to comply with O'Dempsey's orders or face certain death himself. Anyone who got in his way at the time would have been killed, Shorty included, Hall recalls. It was a terrifying reality that Dubois could not escape, and one that ultimately led to the deaths of 3 innocent lives. Peter Hall recalled that Dubois had invited him to come with them to the McKulkin house that night of the disappearance, promising him that he would have the chance to make love. Peter Hall's decision to decline Gary Dubois' invitation to join him and Vincent O'Dempsey at the McKulkin home was perhaps the difference between life and death. The promise of making love was merely a ploy to entice Hall into joining the depraved duo on their mission to murder the family. In retrospect, it was a bullet that Hall dodged, both literally and figuratively. As Hall reflected on that fateful night, he shudders at the thought of what could have happened had he gone along with Dubois. He wondered if he, too, would have been coerced into committing heinous acts of rape and murder against innocent children. The haunting possibility that he could have been complicit in the horrific crimes still sends shivers down his spine. Whether I'd have had the courage to try and change the outcome, I don't know, Hall muses. But if I had, I think I would have probably been still up there now. The weight of the words and the seriousness of the situation are not lost on Hall. He understands the gravity of what could have transpired had he made a different decision that night. Looking back, Hall is grateful to have escaped the clutches of the Clockwork Orange gang and to have lived to tell the tale. He knows that the McKulkin family was not so fortunate, and their tragic fate serves as a stark reminder of the evils that lurk in the shadows of society. Hall's confession was a significant breakthrough in the case, and Vincent O'Dempsey and Dubois were convicted and sentenced to life in prison on June 1, 2017. Hall's decision to break the code of silence and his willingness to testify in court played a crucial role in securing the convictions. His wife's tears during the interview were likely a combination of relief and stress because her husband was taking a significant risk to bear witness against O'Dempsey and Dubois. Warren McDonald was mentored by Vincent O'Dempsey for a period of 20 years in criminal activities. Warren's father had a history of criminal association with Vincent, and because of that connection, Vincent took Warren under his guidance and mentorship. They had worked together on several criminal ventures, including overseeing a massive illegal cannabis crop in 1997, which McDonald still vividly remembered. During the drive back to Warwick from the crop site, McDonald remembered a conversation they were having concerning a particularly difficult worker who was causing problems at the crop site. O'Dempsey then said, "Oh, you need a notch on your gun." McDonald didn't understand what he meant by that statement, so he asked what it meant, to which O'Dempsey replied that he needed to kill to gain respect. The stunned McDonald let O'Dempsey keep on talking. That was when O'Dempsey raised the McKulkin murders. Just came straight away with it, McDonald remembers. O'Dempsey right there admitted to the McKulkin murders, saying that Shorty was nothing but an assailant and that they would never catch him as they would never find the bodies. Warren McDonald's decision to come forward and testify against Vince O'Dempsey was not an easy one, as he knew the risk involved in speaking out against him. He had kept his secret about O'Dempsey to himself for the last 20 years. but he eventually decided to testify after the police had gathered enough evidence to put him in jail for years for the drug crop. McDonald's testimony was crucial in securing O'Dempsey's conviction for the McKulkin murders. However, McDonald's decision to testify also put him and his family in danger. O'Dempsey had allegedly planned his murder from his jail cell, and McDonald knew that O'Dempsey had a history of making witnesses disappear. McDonald feared for his life and that of his family, saying, "I would be murdered. My family would be murdered. They're trying to murder me now." Despite the risks, McDonald was determined to get the monkey off his back and bring O'Dempsey to justice. He scoffed at suggestions that he had fabricated the allegations to get off the hook, saying that the stress was unbearable and he could be murdered any day. O'Dempsey had once given him sage advice, saying, "If you want to live a long and healthy life, never repeat a word that'll get yourself or anyone else into trouble," which now seemed ironic given O'Dempsey's situation. Peter Hall's partner at the time, Carolyn Scully, had a daughter named Carrie Ann, who was born on July 14, 1981. Carrie Ann recalls Vincent being around when she was growing up a little bit at her mother's house. Vincent and her mother were seeing each other. Carrie Ann grew up and became a heroin addict. In the middle of 2011, Carrie Ann had young children and needed financial help. She called Vincent, who was then living in Warwick. Vincent gave her some money. Carrie Ann and her children then began living with Vincent in his house at Warwick. According to Carrie, Vincent had lots of books. He bragged to her that he had been in lots of newspapers and that he had been written about in a book. He gave Carrie Ann $20 to go and buy a copy of a book called Shotgun and Standover. While lying on the bed, Vincent told her he'll show her what the book said about it. According to her, he was really proud of it. O'Dempsey showed her a picture in the book of himself walking from court with a leather jacket slung over his shoulder and bragged about the McKulkin murders. "I'm good for it, but they'll never get me for it," O'Dempsey said. A little later he said to her, "I did it, and they still couldn't get me for it." Miss Scully left the relationship the next day and remained in fear of the man who she later told police was an intelligent serial killer who covered his tracks. "He takes you in the middle of the night like an angel, and you're gone for good," Miss Scully told a committee hearing in November 2015. The memory of that night still haunted her. The image of O'Dempsey's face etched into her mind. She knew then that he was not just an ordinary man, but a predator, a monster, hiding in plain sight. Carrie Scully went into hiding, living in fear for her life, constantly looking over her shoulder, waiting for the day when O'Dempsey would come for her. But she knew that she had made the right decision, that it was better to live in fear than to become another victim of a man who had no remorse for his heinous crimes. In the final stretch of the trial, a crucial witness emerged, adding weight to the evidence against O'Dempsey. The witness, a remand prisoner whose identity remains undisclosed, had jotted down O'Dempsey's confession on scraps of paper and crossword puzzles. The prisoner testified that O'Dempsey had said, "She had to be dealt with," referring to Barbara McKulkin. He had also tried to distance himself from the murders, claiming that he had never laid a hand on the children and that Shorty had committed the gruesome acts. The informant also revealed that O'Dempsey had approached him after being granted bail, with an attempt to prevent the testimony of Warren McDonald and Carrie Scully in court. The informant detailed how O'Dempsey had shared information about McDonald's daily routine, including the road he took and the roadside diner where he stopped for breakfast. The revelations left no doubt about O'Dempsey's involvement in the McKulkin case and his intention to silence witnesses. With the testimony of the final witness, the case against O'Dempsey and Dubois was complete, and the verdict seemed imminent. Vincent O'Dempsey was a 78-year-old man, born in 1937, who was currently on trial for murder in the Brisbane Supreme Court. His great-grandfather, James O'Dempsey, came to Warwick from Ireland in the mid-1850s and started a family that would ultimately produce a murderer. He sits upright and attentive in the dock, wearing a hearing aid to listen to the proceedings. But those who know him well say that he has always been lacking in empathy and feeling, as he was diagnosed as a psychopath in his youth. O'Dempsey's large meaty hands and coal-black eyes unnerve those who have encountered him. He has never shown any remorse for his actions, and if anything, seems proud of his violent past. His former girlfriend, Carrie Ann Scully, testified in court that he boasted to her about his involvement in the McKulkin murders, and even confessed to being responsible for a total of 33 murders. That would make him one of Australia's worst mass murderers, although he has not been charged for any other murders. There is still speculation that O'Dempsey was involved in the Whiskey A Go Go nightclub bombing that left 15 people dead. O'Dempsey had co-opted Shorty Dubois and his Clockwork Orange gang cronies to firebomb Torino's nightclub 11 days earlier, which could offer a possible motive for the McKulkin murders. It is believed that the reason why Barbara McKulkin and her daughters were killed was because they feared she might reveal something she knew about the bombing of the Whiskey A Go Go. The speculation all throughout the murder trial was that O'Dempsey and others were concerned they might be incriminated in the whiskey murders because of their involvement in the Torino arson 11 days earlier. And for that reason, Barbara had to die. Detective Sergeant Virginia Gray told 60 Minutes that she believed Barbara knew enough to get herself into trouble. The children, unfortunately, would have placed O'Dempsey and Dubois at the scene of their mother's abduction that night, so it is suggested that is why they had to die as well. But some people, like Peter Hall, believe that O'Dempsey enjoyed killing for the sake of it. He believed that O'Dempsey went there that night for even baser reasons. Regardless of his motivations, O'Dempsey is a psychopath, gangster, and convicted murderer. After more than half a century, he is only now coming into focus as Australia's worst serial killer. The trial of the McKulkin murders was held in the Supreme Court in Brisbane, where Justice Peter Applegarth presided over the sentencing hearing on May 23, 2017. The court heard that modern laws allowing the court to set a parole eligibility date could not be applied retrospectively. Justice Applegarth addressed both offenders, Vincent O'Dempsey and Gary Dubois, telling them that they were cold-blooded, heartless killers who showed no remorse and would likely die in jail. He said that O'Dempsey had boasted about killing the McKulkins and getting away with it, and that he was a hardened killer and criminal with no conscience. Judge Applegarth stated that O'Dempsey had murdered a defenseless woman and was a child killer who was beyond redemption. He also said that Dubois had no conscience and was a cowardly old man who had aided O'Dempsey and continued to do so out of fear. Justice Applegarth further explained that O'Dempsey used intimidation and traded on his reputation as a mad dog. He said that Dubois had obeyed O'Dempsey and aided in killing and assaulting the girls like a coward. However, when Dubois began talking over the sentence, Justice Applegarth told him to shut up. When he did not comply, Dubois was removed from the courtroom. The judge went on to say that the last hours of Barbara, Vicky, and Leanne's lives must have been terrifying. He said that Dubois was a coward, but O'Dempsey had been the prime offender. Justice Applegarth also explained that it was clear that Barbara McKulkin knew enough about each of the pair's roles in the nightclub bombings at the time for them to want to silence her. He said that Dubois and O'Dempsey had escaped justice for decades, and luck was on their side. So was the fear they installed in others. Justice Applegarth explained that the dedication of police, the testimony of dozens of witnesses, and the conscience and courage of some key witnesses at each of the trials had ensured justice at last. He told the killers that they could have no expectation of early parole. If they maintained their silence over where the bodies were buried, they could not reasonably expect to ever be granted parole. Earlier in the hearing, Justice Applegarth had allowed O'Dempsey to read a handwritten note in the court. In the note, the killer said that he had been wrongly convicted on false testimony and never had any reason to harm the McKulkins. Dubois also requested to speak, but had not prepared anything in writing, so he was not able to address the court directly. Outside court, O'Dempsey's lawyer Terry O'Gorman said that his client was innocent and had been convicted on unfair testimony, including statements from Billy McKulkin, who had since died. However, O'Gorman acknowledged the grief and angst that the McKulkin family had been through. He extended his sympathies to the family while repeating what O'Dempsey had said, that he was innocent of these charges. In the end, Justice Applegarth sentenced both men to life in prison. He told them that they would never be released unless they revealed the location of the McKulkin family's bodies. The judge's words echoed through the courtroom, leaving a lasting impression on all of those present. The story of Barbara McKulkin was not just a tale of tragedy and murder, but also one of secrets and hidden truths. Vincent O'Dempsey may have thought he knew everything about Barbara that fateful night, but there was one thing he didn't know: her daughter. As a young girl of 17 years old, living in Queensland, Australia, Barbara had fallen pregnant, but the family of the boy wanted nothing to do with her. Neither did her parents want her to keep the baby or marry the father. And in those days, tragically, there was no option for an unmarried mother, no domestic support benefits, and nothing but shame and social pressure for having a baby out of wedlock. So she gave her beautiful newborn baby girl away for adoption in 1957. The adoptive parents renamed the baby Joycelyn, and she grew up unaware of her biological family until she discovered the adoption papers hidden in her adoptive mother's bedroom's cupboard in 1972 when she was 14 years old. Joycelyn was devastated when she finally learned the truth about her birth mother, Barbara, and her two half-sisters who were murdered. She had always felt loved by her adoptive family, but the loss of her biological family was a heavy burden to bear. "You can't help but feel so sad about the whole scenario," Joycelyn lamented. "They didn't do anything wrong. Just because she had some information, they didn't deserve to die." Joycelyn often wondered if her mother had been allowed to keep her, would she have ever found herself married to the detestable criminal Billy McKulkin. She also wondered if she had been with her sisters that fateful night in January 1974, would she too have been taken for a one-way drive by Vincent O'Dempsey. During the O'Dempsey murder trial, Joycelyn sat in the public gallery, studying his unemotional visage as his dreadful crimes were detailed. She had hoped to see some remorse or acknowledgement of the pain he had caused her family, but he showed none. Joycelyn was philosophical about not letting O'Dempsey's crimes against her family get under her skin, but she wanted justice to be done. "They're evil men, and they don't deserve to be walking around free," she said. One mystery that remains unsolved is where Barbara and her children's bodies are buried. Joycelyn hopes that the DNA sample taken from her as Barbara's closest living relative may one day be used to confirm their location. "For 45 years I've kept all that to myself," Joycelyn said, her voice trembling. "My mother gave me life, so it was something that I could do for her in death, and just a way of saying thank you to her." Joycelyn implores Shorty Dubois, who surely knows where the bodies are buried, to finally do the right thing. "Could you at least have a shred of decency, and at least tell us where you buried them, so we can have closure for everybody in the family?" However, it is unlikely that Vincent O'Dempsey will ever reveal what he knows. He probably relishes the pain his final foul secret still causes. The story of Barbara McKulkin is a tragic one, but Joycelyn's hope for justice and closure continues to shine through. She may never know all the answers, but she will always honor her mother's memory and fight for the truth. On the morning of June 7, 2021, a 74-year-old man was found lying lifeless at 4:30 a.m. in his single cell at the Maryborough Correctional Centre in Queensland, Australia. The man was later identified as Gary Reginald Dubois, who had been convicted of the manslaughter of Barbara McKulkin and the rape and murders of her two daughters, Vicky and Leanne, in 1974. Staff and paramedics tried to revive him, but he was declared dead at 5:20 a.m. Dubois had been jailed for life in 2017, alongside co-accused Vince O'Dempsey. Both men were described as cold-blooded, heartless killers who showed no remorse for their crimes. Justice Peter Applegarth, who presided over the case, said that the last hours of the victims' lives must have been terrifying. Dubois was described as callous and a coward, while O'Dempsey was deemed the main offender. Dubois' death occurred just as he was due to testify this month at a reopened coronial inquest into the 1973 Whiskey A Go-Go nightclub bombing. The death was a significant blow to the investigation, as Dubois' testimony could have shed light on the incident and helped to bring those responsible to justice. On May 16, 2022, Vincent O'Dempsey, a convicted triple murderer, testified at a coronial inquest regarding the 1973 firebombing of Brisbane's Whiskey A Go-Go nightclub. O'Dempsey had been implicated in the attack and was asked tough questions about his involvement. He refused to take an oath or affirmation and expressed defiance throughout the proceedings. He denied any involvement in the arson and claimed not to know James Richard Finch, one of the convicted men. When questioned about the disappearance and murders of Barbara McKulkin and her daughters, he evaded the inquiries. Despite O'Dempsey's denials, there was a sense that he was withholding the complete truth. The inquest aimed to uncover further details about the attack and whether others had knowledge of it. With the conclusion of the inquest approaching, the mystery surrounding the Whiskey A Go-Go attack remained unresolved. The family of Mrs. McKulkin and her two daughters expressed relief that justice had finally been served with the guilty verdict of O'Dempsey. However, they also acknowledged that closure cannot be fully achieved until they locate the remains of their loved ones. Brian Ogden, Mrs. McKulkin's nephew, spoke on behalf of the family outside court and said, "The verdict received today has been a long time coming. For 43 years, our families have longed for information and justice." Nestled in the heart of the Lone Star State, Beaumont, Texas, this vibrant city, with its own unique character, sits along the banks of the mighty Neches River. Home to a diverse population, Beaumont pulsates with energy and intrigue. With a population of over 118,000 residents, Beaumont strikes a balance between a close-knit community and the buzz of urban life. Its streets weave a tapestry of history, as evidenced by the stately architecture that adorns its neighborhoods. The city's roots run deep, with a rich cultural heritage that resonates in its art, music, and culinary offerings. But this city was also the stage for the chilling tale of Mary Edwards. Mary Catherine Edwards, a name that echoed through the corridors of Price Elementary, was more than just a school teacher. Born on July 9, 1963, to Mary Ann Edwards and Lum Caswell Edwards, her journey began in a different time, in a world that awaited her with open arms. From a young age, Mary exuded a natural intellect and a passion for nurturing young minds, leading her down the path of education. In 1992, Mary became a teacher at Price Elementary School in Beaumont, Texas. She had a positive presence and engaged her students with her enthusiasm. Throughout her career, she made a lasting impact on her students, encouraging them to embrace learning. Outside of her professional life, Mary's personal story unfolded against the backdrop of Beaumont's close-knit community. Despite her independent spirit, she cherished the bonds of family and friendship. Living alone in her new townhouse on Park Meadow Street, Mary embraced the solitude and freedom it offered. She had a large circle of friends who would often gather at her house and engage in playful banter. The second week of January 1995 had unfolded like any other for Mary Catherine Edwards, seemingly ordinary and uneventful. The days followed a familiar rhythm, each one blending seamlessly into the next. She carried out her responsibilities, nurturing the minds of young students, and returned to the solace of her home on that ill-fated Friday, January 13th, 1995. As the evening settled upon Beaumont, Mary embarked on her customary routine. She walked her beloved dog, and after a while returned to her townhouse. With a glass of wine in hand, she exchanged sweet words with her devoted boyfriend over a phone call. Little did they know that their tender exchange would mark the final known contact with Mary Catherine Edwards. The next day, Mary's parents tried to reach out to their daughter, but they received no response. With each unanswered call, their concern and anxiety deepened. Unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, they decided to go to Mary's home, unaware of the horrifying discovery that awaited them. Nervously, they entered her home, their hearts pounding in their chests. What they found in the quietness of the bathroom would forever haunt their memories. Mary Catherine Edwards lay lifeless, drowned in the bathtub before them. Her hands were bound with handcuffs, and her life had been cruelly snuffed out. As the reality of the situation sank in, despair tightened its grip on their hearts. Mary had not only endured a terrible assault, but had also been robbed of her very existence. The investigation into Mary Catherine Edwards' case started off with a lot of fervor. The detectives carefully searched the crime scene, looking for any clues that could help solve the mystery. They combed through every inch of her bedroom, collecting and analyzing items with great care. The results of the autopsy were also important in uncovering the truth. The medical examiner examined Mary's body and discovered foreign DNA that pointed the investigators in the right direction. The evidence, including physical items and people's statements, began to form a picture that hinted at who might be responsible for the crime. The investigators worked tirelessly, leaving no stone unturned. They interviewed countless individuals, from people who may have seen something strange to Mary's fellow teachers and people close to her. They wanted to gather as much information as possible to piece together what happened. Despite their hard work, the case eventually hit a dead end. The leads they had once pursued with hope started to fade away, leaving them with a frustrating sense of silence. It was like they were stuck in a dark tunnel, not knowing which way to turn. One detective who had a personal connection to the case through his close friend had vivid dreams relating to Mary's death. In these dreams, he saw the autopsy and imagined Mary reaching out to him as if wanting to reveal the identity of her attacker. But every time, the dream would end abruptly, leaving him with more questions than answers. His determination to find the truth remained strong, and his unique perspective and emotional investment compelled the investigators to seek his guidance. Mary Catherine Edwards' tragic death had a profound impact on everyone touched by her story. It ignited a shared determination to bring closure to her case, reigniting the hope for justice to be served. Despite diligent efforts, the leads in the case gradually dwindled, and eventually, the investigation reached a standstill. The case went cold, leaving investigators with no substantial breakthroughs or new information to pursue. As the years passed, the memory of Mary Catherine Edwards' tragic case lingered in the hearts of those who knew her and the community that had been touched by her presence. It was a case that held personal significance for many, including Bob Wortham, the district attorney of Jefferson County. Several individuals in the office had personal connections with Mary, either through their children who had been her students or because they attended the same church as her. This sparked a renewed determination to seek justice. The Texas Rangers, led by Brandon Bess, stepped forward to reignite the investigation in 2020. Together with his partners, Aaron and Tina Llewellyn, they embarked on a meticulous journey to re-examine every aspect of the case. Their mission was to bring all the scattered pieces of evidence together, sorting through the old files and eliminating duplicates, ensuring that nothing was overlooked. With the foundation laid, the team began exploring new possibilities. It was during this time that they crossed paths with Othram Labs, a pioneering force in the field of DNA analysis. Brandon Bess, though not an expert in the intricacies of science, recognized the potential that this technology held. He engaged in conversations with experts like Dr. David Middleman, the founder and CEO of Othram Labs, seeking to understand the significance and advantages of DNA analysis in the context of the investigation. Advancements in DNA technology played a crucial role in cracking the case. DNA taken from Mary's body was entered into a database, and authorities utilized family tree websites to search for potential matches. Finally, in 2020, a breakthrough occurred as a match was found linking the DNA to Clayton Foreman. The long-awaited breakthrough breathed new life into the investigation and paved the way for justice to be served. Detective Aaron Llewellyn, who also served as an FBI agent, played a pivotal role in the case. Recognizing the need for additional assistance, Llewellyn reached out to his FBI partners in Ohio for support. The team coordinated efforts to collect discarded DNA from the suspect, requiring a trip to Ohio. After thorough preparations and discussions with their Ohio partners, the team arranged for the suspect to be interviewed. Astonishingly, he agreed to speak with them. However, the encounter proved to be a turning point in the investigation. Following the interview, he was swiftly arrested on a murder warrant issued in Texas. The wheels of justice were finally set in motion. The significance of DNA evidence cannot be overstated. In this case, DNA collected from Clayton Foreman's semen, found among discarded items, became a vital piece of the puzzle. Clayton Bernard Foreman, born in Franklin County, Ohio in 1961, grew up in a seemingly ordinary suburban setting. As a young man, he pursued his education, attending school in Texas before returning to Ohio. While his early years appeared unremarkable, the shadows of darkness began to emerge with the passage of time. In 1981, the world witnessed the malevolence that dwelled within Foreman when he committed a heinous act. A former classmate became the unfortunate victim of his violent assault. The chilling details of the crime unfolded. A stranded woman at a gas station, a deceptive guise of authority as he falsely claimed to be a police officer, a ride home offered as a pretense of safety. However, once inside the car, Foreman's true intentions were revealed. He bound her hands with a belt, brandished a knife, and subjected her to a horrifying violation. The aftermath of this act saw Foreman facing charges, ultimately pleading guilty to the assault. Astonishingly, he received only probation as punishment, leaving the door ajar for future atrocities. The years that followed were shrouded in a facade of normalcy. In 1982, Foreman went on to marry a woman who was friends with Mary Edwards. Mary was also a casual friend and classmate of Foreman at Forest Park High School. She attended his first wedding as a bridesmaid. However, the union proved to be short-lived, as the couple divorced in 1993. 2 years later, in 1995, tragedy struck when Mary Catherine Edwards was assaulted and murdered. Though living an outwardly ordinary life in the suburbs of Ohio, working in finance, Foreman carried the weight of a dark secret and a potential connection to a heinous crime. While Foreman appeared to seamlessly blend into society, he also remained entwined with his past. Active in organizing reunions for his high school classmates, he attended the last gathering in 2018. The revelation of his alleged involvement in Mary Edwards' murder sent shockwaves through their ranks, challenging their perceptions and leaving them grappling with disbelief. On April 26, 2021, Clayton Bernard Foreman, 61, of Reynoldsburg, Ohio, was arrested in Franklin County, Ohio. He was charged with 1 count of capital murder in the 1995 assault and killing of Mary Catherine Edwards, 31, of Beaumont. After more than 26 years, a grand jury finally indicted Foreman for his heinous crime. Following his arrest, Foreman had his first appearance in the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas, General Division, on May 6, 2021. During this court hearing, he contested his extradition to Texas, where the charges against him originated. His next court date was scheduled for June 3, 2021, and it was expected to involve testimony from Texas investigators. At that time, the legal process would be followed to determine if Foreman would face the possibility of the death penalty. Currently, Foreman is being held without bond in the Franklin County Correction Center in Ohio, awaiting further legal proceedings. The prosecution, led by Patrick Noth, will continue to build its case against him for the assault and murder of his former high school classmate, Mary Catherine Edwards, in 1995. The diligent pursuit of justice has brought closure to this long-standing case and offers hope for a resolution for Mary's family and loved ones. According to friends, family, and former students, Mary Catherine Edwards was remembered as a compassionate and caring individual who made a positive impact on the lives of those around her. Demetria Green, one of Mary's close friends, expressed gratitude for Mary's acceptance and support, which helped her overcome shyness and become more outgoing. Demetria appreciated how Mary fostered a nurturing environment that allowed her to be herself. Former student Malcolm Wells felt profound sadness upon learning about Mary's tragic death. He remembered her as a genuinely kind person, and the shocking details of the crime deeply impacted him. Malcolm expressed his sorrow, emphasizing the horrific nature of the incident, which resonated with others who were acquainted with Mary. These personal accounts emphasize the profound impact Mary Catherine Edwards had on her students and friends. Her kindness, support, and dedication to her students' well-being will be cherished and remembered by those whose lives she touched.
Saratoga is a city in Wood County, Wisconsin, located in Silicon Valley in southeastern Bay Area. Saratoga is an affluent residential community known for its wineries, restaurants, and attractions like Villa Montalvo, Mountain Winery, and Haycone Gardens. It not only offers inviting neighborhoods and friendly communities, but also a booming industry and incredible growth opportunities. Saratoga is home to several unique neighborhoods, each with its own character and charm. Brookview and Pride's Crossing in the north, Blue Hills and Greenbrier in the southwest, and Congress Springs in the southwestern corner of Saratoga. But amidst the beauty and charm of such vibrant communities, a sinister crime was committed in 1984. A 73-year-old woman was found brutally murdered in her own home, leaving investigators with little to no substantial evidence. Eleanor Roberts of Nakusa, Wood County, Wisconsin, was born on April 10, 1911. She was a beloved mother, wife, and grandmother. She had a son named Marshall Roberts who lived close to her in Saratoga. Known for her kind-hearted nature and always going out of her way to make sure everyone around her feels loved and cared for, she was a beloved member of the Saratoga community that she was residing in 1984. Sadly, when she was least expecting it, tragedy was waiting for her just around the corner. The events that unfolded in the Roberts household on that fateful day on November 27, 1984, was nothing short of chilling. It was after Eleanor failed to show up to meet her brother at an automobile dealership where she was looking to buy a car that her brother went to her home on South Hollywood Road in Saratoga. But when Eleanor didn't answer the door, he called her son Marshall Roberts. As Marshall made his way to his mother's Saratoga home, little did he know that he was about to be confronted with a scene of horror that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Marshall knew there was a key to his mother's house kept at a hidden place outdoors. As soon as he unlocked the door and entered the home, he immediately noticed that something was amiss. The air was heavy, the house was eerily quiet. But it wasn't until he made his way to the bathroom that he realized the magnitude of what had happened. As he opened the bathroom door, Marshall was hit with a sight that he could never have prepared for. His mother, Eleanor Roberts, lay motionless on the floor in a pool of her own blood. Her head was covered with a bath mat, which Marshall immediately pulled back, only to be confronted with the unthinkable. His mother's lifeless body, with signs of violent trauma. In that moment, Marshall knew that he was looking at a crime scene, one that would forever change the course of his life. Marshall immediately dialed 911 and reported that he had found his mother dead in her own home and gave the address to the police. Within minutes, officers were dispatched to the location. After he dialed 911, in a short while the place was packed with Wood County Sheriff's Department detectives and forensic team personnel. The forensic pathologist who did the autopsy determined that she died from a combination of blunt force trauma and numerous stab wounds, which based on the shape and other factors he believed came from being stabbed with scissors. There were no natural causes related to her death, and the death was ruled a homicide, as the sheriff's office report stated. Someone had stabbed and beaten Eleanor to death. She suffered broken ribs and a punctured heart and lungs, the wounds being consistent with being stabbed with a pair of scissors. The only items authorities found missing upon further investigation of the home were a pair of scissors, a knife, and a telephone, according to the warrant. As the investigation into the tragic loss of an innocent life unfolded, the killers seemed to have left no trace behind, leaving the authorities with nothing to go on. But just when all hope seemed lost, a glimmer of light appeared in the form of a palm print that was found in the bathroom where Eleanor's body was found. Investigators found the knife that same day on Hillcrest Avenue in Saratoga, not far from Robert's South Hollywood Road home. They found the scissors the next day, about 1.25 miles away, and the telephone 4 months later in March 1985 in the Wisconsin River, about 2.5 miles away. On the day of Eleanor's death, an officer found a ski mask on the branch of a tree across from Eleanor's home, according to the criminal complaint. It appeared to have been thrown there. The mask, along with the knife, the scissors, and the phone were found in places along the same route. The investigators theorized that the potential suspect lived along this route as well. Upon further investigation, the route on which the evidence was found led the investigators to John A. Sarver, an employee who worked at a store where Eleanor had purchased a lawnmower from. On December 3, 1984, Sarver was first interviewed. He told investigators the day before Eleanor's death he was with another witness shooting pool at Evergreen Lanes. Investigators learned that Eleanor came into contact with Sarver when she bought a lawnmower from Competition Cycle where he worked during the summer of 1984. The lawnmower required repairs covered by warranty, and Sarver had performed the repairs when Eleanor made the complaint. On May 1, 1985, Sarver was interviewed again, and he confirmed his last contact with Eleanor would have been in the summer of 1984 when he went to repair the lawnmower she had bought from his employer. When the palm print that was found in the bathroom was identified and confirmed as Sarver's, he was interviewed again. And again, he told the investigators that his last contact with her was late summer, early fall 1984, which was consistent with other records investigators had. But Sarver said he never was inside her home. So, how did his handprint get there? The other witness Sarver claimed to have been with at the time of the murders was also interviewed. And while the witness could not specifically remember everything that night, he said he didn't remember ever shooting pool with Sarver. Investigators said he gave several different alibis in that interview. And upon further interrogation of the witnesses Sarver had claimed to be with, none of them could be confirmed. In fact, another witness he said that he was with told investigators they were by themselves that evening. During various interviews, Sarver gave different explanations of where he was when Eleanor was killed. Investigators were never able to confirm any of his explanations or alibis. Another witness around the time of Eleanor's death told investigators Sarver was having financial difficulties and that he had borrowed $2,000 from him shortly after the murder. The witness said he was never paid back. In 2005, a confidential informant at the time told investigators that 17 years earlier, Sarver admitted to killing a woman with a karate chop to her neck, which matched Eleanor's injuries according to the complaint. 4 small claims cases were filed against Sarver since 2006 for non-payment of bills, and one similar case was filed 3 months after he was arrested. Eventually, though it seemed like all the evidence pointed to Sarver, the case went cold. Retired Wood County Sheriff's Office Lieutenant Robert Lewandowski, who was one of the first investigators on the case, said the case often stalled through the years. Former Sheriff's investigator Jay Schroeder spent hours organizing years' worth of information. There often were disagreements between investigators and prosecutors about whether the case was ready to be reopened. Lewandowski said for decades it sat cold and a solution seemed impossibly far. Nearly 3 decades after the crime, in May 2013, investigators said they got a search warrant to obtain DNA from John A. Sarver, whom authorities had regarded as a prime suspect in the case since Eleanor's tragic demise. Jerome C. Lippert, a retired business executive who lives in the Pittsville area and studies local history and events, wrote an article that was published in the Wisconsin Rapids Tribune on December 16, 2016, which made a shocking claim. Not all police officers involved in the case deserved praise. What unfolded was a story within the story. During the late 1980s, John Sarver served as a citizen informant for the Wood County Drug Enforcement Unit under the supervision of Detective Brian Illingworth, also known as Big Al in the field. Illingworth, who was later retired as a detective and former Wood County Sheriff, testified during the trial. Despite attempting to present a favorable view of his work with Sarver, evidence presented during the trial suggested that the former sheriff had become too close to his informant. For instance, Sarver was not fingerprinted upon starting his work, a standard procedure that was only carried out 2 years later by another officer. Additionally, Illingworth attended Sarver's wedding, an uncommon practice, and there was a question during the trial about Sarver becoming heavily intoxicated while under Illingworth's supervision, which is clearly against departmental policy. In 1988, during the investigation into Eleanor Roberts' murder, an intriguing meeting took place at a cabin in Adams County, where Sarver and Illingworth were purportedly alone before other law enforcement officers arrived to question Sarver. The details of that conversation held during this private interaction, if any, have never been disclosed. Furthermore, Lippert was aware of another crucial piece of information that never came to light during the trial. In the 1990s, a member of the Roberts family approached then-Sheriff Illingworth with a Reader's Digest article that discussed advances in DNA testing, wondering if it could help with the case. Shockingly, the sheriff glanced at the family member and callously retorted, "The suspect is a friend of mine," before tossing the magazine back at them. This is an utterly unacceptable response for any law enforcement officer to give to a grieving family member seeking justice for their loved one. It can now be openly stated that not all police officers involved in this case deserve praise. This attitude or conflict could have contributed to the delay in justice for this case. Furthermore, there was a peculiar incident that occurred towards the end of Sheriff Illingworth's career in Wood County, which may have some correlation. It is possible that some long-term residents in the area remember that in 1997, Illingworth was admitted to Rock County Institution, allegedly due to depression and struggles with alcohol and drug abuse. This information was initially kept from the public, but eventually came to light, and as a result, Illingworth decided not to seek re-election in 1998. He retired from law enforcement without much fanfare the following year. In that article, Lippert also noted that there had been a chief suspect. At the time, he was not at liberty to name the individual for obvious reasons, but that person was Mr. Sarver. Lippert also indicated that the whole story was not being told. Indeed, the trial proved that his assertion was also correct. He asked for renewed interest in this case, which led the investigators to work on this case determined to find the killer of Eleanor Roberts. The Wood County Sheriff's Officer Heiser added, "The first thing we did was look at all the evidence. Looked at the 6,000 pages of reports that were done over the years, and then we met with all the investigators who had worked the case." The accused, Sarver, was 21 when Eleanor died, worked at a business that sold her a lawnmower, and had gone to service it at her home, according to the warrant. At first, he told authorities he was never inside Roberts' home, but investigators later found his palm print on the bathroom counter. In April 2020, the same witness told investigators that Sarver admitted to going into Eleanor's home to rob her. He said he was surprised she was home and beat her to death, by accident, according to the complaint. After nearly 36 years, developments were made in the gruesome Central Wisconsin murder case. One of the key witnesses who wanted to remain anonymous finally came forward in 2020, after almost 4 decades of suppressing his memories, primarily due to fear. He was the one who confirmed at trial that there were in fact 3 people at the crime scene in 1984. During his testimony, Mr. Sarver was referred to as a scary dude due to his connections with the police, which made him afraid to speak out and even fear for his safety. In 2020, he overcame his fear of John Sarver and decided to come forward with his painful memories, realizing that it was better to confront them before he died. His testimony was truly gripping. The courtroom was so silent that one could have heard a pin drop. As per the complaint, the witness told the investigators that he had heard that Sarver had confessed to breaking into Eleanor's house through the rear entrance with the intention of robbing her and accidentally killing her. The criminal complaint states that the department persisted in submitting samples for DNA testing from 1988 until 2020, utilizing increasingly sophisticated testing techniques as they became available. Unfortunately, due to the global pandemic, the case experienced a setback after charges were pressed in 2020. The Wood County Sheriff's Office and Wisconsin Department of Justice, DOJ, announced that on August 27, 2020, the prime suspect of this case, John A. Sarver, from Port Edwards, Wisconsin, had been arrested in connection to the first-degree murder in the death of 73-year-old Eleanor Roberts. If convicted, Sarver, who had been in jail pending a $1 million cash bond, faces a maximum sentence of life in prison. Sarver had a hearing and requested Wood County Circuit Judge Nicholas Brazeau Jr. delay the trial, scheduled to start March 14, 2022. Robert's son and Assistant Wisconsin Attorney General Annie Jay, a special prosecutor in the case, both asked Brazeau to keep the trial scheduled for March 14th through 18th, according to online court records. Sarver's attorney, Jeremy Meyer O'Day, said he and attorney Taylor Hart needed more time to interview witnesses and finish their investigation. Brazeau ordered the trial be reset and scheduled for a hearing for updates on March 15, 2022. And in November 2022, John Sarver was found guilty at trial of killing Eleanor Roberts. Because Sarver committed the crime after November 3, 1983, but before August 31, 1995, the judge has no say over his parole eligibility. Sarver will have to serve 13 years and 4 months before he can go before a parole board. An inmate must satisfy 5 requirements before the parole commissioner may recommend a grant to the parole chair. The 5 requirements are good conduct, competition of programming, sufficient reduction in risk to the public upon release, sufficient time served so as not to depreciate the seriousness of the offense, and a completed and approved release plan as determined by request of an investigation by the commission. He has had the opportunity to live a full life, to raise a family that maybe he shouldn't have had the opportunity to do. It's a good thing that he did it because there are good people in this world, but there isn't nothing in my mind or heart that makes me think that he should have opportunities to get out there, said Judge Brazeau. Time between the murder and his arrest in 2020 was his parole, according to the reports. The arrest came as the result of a joint investigation between the Sheriff's Department and the State Department of Justice, which will prosecute the case, Wood County Sheriff Sean Becker said. It was a brutal homicide that has gone unsolved for way too long, Becker said during a news conference outside the Wood County Courthouse. There were times that people were frustrated, but we never gave up. The prosecutors from the State of Wisconsin Department of Justice, DOJ, did an excellent job of methodically building their case. The lead defense attorney did his job in fine fashion as well, working to cast doubt whenever he could. Ultimately, however, he was not successful, because from my perspective, the facts were just too much to overcome, Wood County Sheriff Sean Becker said. November 2, 2022, in Branch 2 Wood County Court, a guilty verdict was finally rendered in the case. John A. Sarver was convicted of this heinous crime, and the case finally came to its conclusion. On January 23, 2023, justice was finally served in the case when John A. Sarver was sentenced for the first-degree murder of 73-year-old Eleanor Roberts. The resolution is a significant achievement and testament to law enforcement officials' dedication and persistence, providing closure to the victim's family and the community, and reminding us that justice can be served regardless of time passed.
This case takes us to Sanford, one of the cities of the U.S. state of Florida. It is situated in the central part of Florida. Sanford, the historic waterfront gateway city, is located near the mouth of the St. Johns River on the southern edge of Lake Monroe. Thousands of years before the city was founded, Native Americans inhabited the region. Since then, a myriad of diverse people settled down in the Sanford region. The historic district has grown in recent years, drawing a wide range of restaurants and breweries, and providing a charming low-key nightlife to the city. The Army, Air Force, and Naval Training Center in Orlando brought plenty of people to reside in Sanford for comfort. It has a tight-knit community where people help one another, even though it has its share of local crime. Pamela Cahenes' murder was one such crime that Sanford witnessed in 1984. Born on August 24, 1958, in Stillwater, Washington County, Minnesota, Pamela Jane Cahenes was the second youngest of 8 siblings. Her parents, Louis and Alice Cahenes, ran a dairy farm together to raise their 8 children. Pamela was raised in a close-knit, loving family in Stillwater. Later, she relocated to St. Paul so she could work for a publishing house. By the time she was 25, she wanted to explore more. She applied for the Navy, and fortunately, she got the offer from the Navy to travel the globe. Pamela gladly accepted the offer and decided to report to boot camp in Orlando with her parents' approval. It was because of her background on the family farm. She was confident and well prepared for military duty. In order to travel across the nation to Florida, Pamela Cahenes bid farewell to her 7 brothers and sisters in May 1984. She was excited about the boot camp, and was indeed thriving in her training. Finally, she successfully made it through 2 months and graduated from the Naval Training Center of Orlando. Before reporting for her duty to serve the nation, she wanted to return home one more time to spend time with her loving family in Minnesota. But things didn't go as planned. On August 3, 1984, Pamela graduated from her training in the Orlando Naval Training Center after 2 months of hard work and consistency. The next morning, Pamela went to the Fashion Square Mall in Orlando. She bought a few things and spent a good time strolling around the area. She bought something in the late afternoon at a Kmart in Orlando. Between 6 p.m. and 7:30 p.m., she was spotted at the Navy Training Center with an unidentified man, and then in Main Street. The two were strolling in the same area. Pamela and the unknown man were later spotted at the Mariners Club, a pub and club on the premise of the Navy Training Center. She was supposedly also seen after 8 p.m. at an ABC liquor store in Sanford. She was quite excited about the new life she was stepping into. However, fate had other plans for her. On the morning of August 5, 1984, a car was passing by the Riverview area near Sanford. It was around 7 a.m., and the driver was enjoying the calmness around when his eyes landed on something unusual. It was a woman, lying unconscious in the front yard of an abandoned house in the same area. The driver stopped his car and took a closer look at the woman. It didn't take him long to understand that what he thought to be an unconscious woman laying on a lawn was actually deceased. He immediately called 911 and reported everything that he had discovered. Seminole County Police rushed to the crime scene. The police confirmed that it was the body of 25-year-old Pamela Cahenes. She was found almost naked except for a pair of white underwear. Nobody knew how she got to be a half-hour north of the Orlando Naval Training Facility. Was she taken to that place, or did she go there willingly? Based on the immediate physical evidence on her body, police reported that she had been beaten and strangled. They were also able to deduce that she was not killed at the location where her body was found. Rather, she was just dumped there from a vehicle with all of her belongings. A generic receipt found at the crime site indicated that a transaction was made by Pamela at a Chinese restaurant around 1 a.m., which confirmed that she was still alive at 1 a.m. on August 5, 1984. Pamela had her whole life in front of her, but there she was, lying dead cold in the front yard of an abandoned house. A young lady who dreamt of serving the nation by fighting for it lost the battle of life to some vicious criminal. Was the criminal someone she already knew, or was it some stranger who resided in the local area? What could be the motive behind this murder? The investigation started immediately after finding her body, and the detectives firmly believed that the suspect was related to the training base. They found bloodstains on her fingernails, and it was reported in the autopsy that she tried fighting back for 8 to 10 minutes, but then the murderer overpowered her and was successful in killing her. In fact, the police also retrieved bodily fluid samples from her underwear, which police believed to be a significant piece of evidence in the case. Other than that, police were able to get a detailed timeline of her movements and places where she had been seen between August 3, 1984, the day of graduation, and August 5, 1984, the day her body was found, in case any clues could lead the investigators to the suspect. It helped investigators with two things. First, it arranged the series of events that took place before her murder in chronological order. And second, it provided them with a suspect who Pamela was hanging out with when she was last seen at Mariners Club on the night of August 4, 1984. Investigators were unable to identify her close friends because the majority of Pamela's classmates had already departed Orlando. Meanwhile, Pamela's family members back in Minnesota could not understand why somebody would want to harm her. Detectives of Seminole County, Florida, put a lot of effort into the case, but no arrests were ever made. Slowly, and unfortunately due to the lack of evidence, the case went cold. However, in the late 1980s, in a demoralizing turn of events, the family received a tip that the suspect might have been captured, but it was revealed that the tip was inaccurate. One of Pamela's older siblings, Eileen Cahenes Bergman, recalled that the incident led her and her family to lose faith in the investigation. Justice seemed like a dream for the Cahenes family at that time. Investigators were as frustrated as the family, if not more. They had similar questions in their minds. How long would it take to capture the perpetrator? If the killer is still roaming around freely, how many more lives, like Pamela's, are at stake? The case was reopened in 1995 when the investigators were confident that they had access to new and better technology. They carried out forensic tests on Pamela's underwear from a new perspective. With the DNA taken from under her fingernails and the bodily fluid that was found on the underwear, forensic experts were able to create a DNA profile of the suspect. Although they did succeed in creating the DNA profile of the suspect, they did not manage to identify him. Without any constructive lead to move on, detectives were standing at the same point they started the investigation. Slowly, the case turned cold again, for almost another 2 decades. The Cahenes family tried to move on, but couldn't, as Pamela's death and not finding the person behind it weighed way more than they thought. It wasn't until 2018 that investigators had the technology that had the potential to provide a more constructive result. Thus, they decided to give this case another shot and try their luck again. Based on the extracted DNA and the suspect profiling performed in the 1990s, they were able to build a family tree after uploading the data of the extracted DNA to a public database and analyzing the matches. This led them to 59-year-old Thomas Lewis Garner, who was a dental hygienist practicing in Jacksonville in 2018. Born on January 16, 1960, Thomas Lewis Garner grew up in Glenwood, Alabama, USA. In his long career, he had the phase of serving the nation when he joined the military and training centers of the naval recruitment facilities. In 1984, he was training at Orlando Naval Training Center. Soon after, he decided to leave the military and practiced as an independent dental hygienist. In February 2019, a surveillance team watching Garner observed him throwing out a bag of garbage at his Jacksonville residence. They retrieved a cigarette butt, a cotton swab, and a piece of used dental floss from the bag. These items were sent for DNA analysis. Soon after, the results were back. DNA from the bodily fluid on Pamela's underwear matched Garner's DNA. The Seminole County Sheriff's Department detective texted the Cahenes family on Sunday, March 10, 2019, to set up a face-to-face meeting in Minnesota, where 5 of the siblings still resided. The family was expecting an informal meeting that would include some case updates, as the detectives had not explained the reasons before the meeting. The siblings gathered at Bergman's home, and 4 days later, on March 14, 2019, Thursday morning, it was the time for the meeting. When the investigators entered the room and announced that she wanted to show them a video, the siblings were sure it was some update on the case of their deceased sister. The footage showed Thomas being taken into custody on March 13, 2019, 1 day before the meeting. Thomas Garner was unknown to the Cahenes family. However, his existence now was a constant reminder to them that he was the one who took away the life of their loving sister Pam. Eileen recalled the moment investigators informed them about the arrest. She remarked that the siblings never really knew that the case would be solved, so once they were informed about the arrest, they were overjoyed and overwhelmed with a sense of relief. It was after the Cahenes family was informed, the news of the arrest was made public. Sheriff Dennis M. Lemma of Seminole County remarked that the man probably thought he was getting away with murder. Investigators were now able to retrieve information about his background, which suggested that Thomas was stationed at the Naval Training Facility in Orlando at the same time as Pamela Cahenes. After his arrest, he denied knowing Pamela in person and remarked that he did not understand how he was charged with her murder. Within 2 months of his arrest, Thomas additionally turned up as a potential DNA match in a Honolulu homicide from September 1982. An Atlanta-based employee of Delta Airlines named Kathy Hicks vanished while traveling to Hawaii. Thomas's DNA, according to authorities, matched evidence found at the spot where Kathy Hicks's body was found on a grassy slope along Nauanu Poly Drive close to a ravine. According to reports, Kathy was beaten to death and strangled, just like Pamela. The detectives even found out that he was in Honolulu when Kathy was visiting a softball tournament with her Delta Airlines co-workers and later turned up dead. Thomas Lewis Garner was not charged with killing Kathy Hicks because the case's evidence had not yet been thoroughly examined. He was taken up for his trial at the Seminole County Courthouse in Sanford on May 6, 2021. As the 4-day trial commenced, Pamela's family assembled to seek justice for their beloved Pam. During the trial, Anna Valentini, Assistant State Attorney, said in a statement that for the sake of defending her nation, Pamela Cahenes joined the Navy. Instead, she was forced to defend herself against Thomas Garner for more than 8 minutes before succumbing to his attacks. Thomas maintained his innocence throughout his trial, admitting that he was pretty promiscuous at the time, but denying that he killed her. He also stated that if he had had a casual fling with Pamela, he probably wouldn't remember. Although the motive behind the murder was unknown, and Thomas kept on pleading not guilty to the charges against him, the matching DNA of his bodily fluid found in the underwear of Pamela and the DNA profile of Thomas told a different story. The fact that they were in the same naval training facility in Orlando in the same period was significant enough for the 12-member jury of the Seminole County Courthouse to give away the verdict of this case. The charges against him were proved in favor of the prosecution. After 2 hours of review at the Seminole County Courthouse in Sanford, Thomas Garner of Jacksonville was found guilty by a jury, according to Todd Brown, a spokesperson for the Seminole Brevard State Attorney Phil Archer. Circuit Judge Marlene Alva gave Thomas Garner a life sentence in prison. 2 hours after the procedure with the jury began on the Pamela Cahenes murder case, Eileen said the moment the decision was read was bittersweet. She knew that her young sister Pamela wouldn't ever return, but they still had to seek justice and let Pamela's soul rest in peace. She acknowledged the loss that was around the joy after the verdict was made against Thomas Garner. There was some relaxation, but there was no sense of closure. "It'll stay up there for a while," Eileen said. "Our parents are no longer with us, so it would have been lovely to be able to share it with them and let them appreciate this moment." However, the siblings acknowledged the happiness that the news brought for the rest of them. Nevertheless, the family had some painful recollections after hearing the judgment. Jerry Cahenes, Pamela's elder brother, stated it brought them right back to that same day when they heard the bad news. In Lake Elmo, near Highway 36, a striking new billboard appeared at Eileen's family's company, Country Sun Farm and Greenhouse, after the arrest. It was erected by Eileen's son, who was only 11 years old when his aunt tragically passed away. The billboard was put up to ensure that the entire community could bear witness to justice. Over the years, the case remained a point of deep interest for neighbors, friends, and Pamela's former classmates from Stillwater High, who have steadfastly maintained their involvement. Federal Way, Washington is a city that perfectly blends urban amenities with natural beauty. With its stunning views of Mount Rainier and the shimmering Puget Sound, it's a paradise for nature lovers. The city has a population of over 100,000 people, making it a bustling and diverse community. From shopping malls to movie theaters to sports centers, Federal Way has everything you need for a modern lifestyle. Despite its urban flair, the city has a warm and welcoming vibe that's hard to resist. However, in 1991, a tragic incident rocked the city to its core. The brutal murder of Sara Yarbourough sent shockwaves through the community, turning this idyllic place into a scene of horror. Sara Yarbourough was born on October 3, 1975, in the city of Federal Way, Washington. She was a young woman full of life and energy. Sara had an infectious smile that could light up a room, and a kind heart that touched everyone she met. Sara was an excellent student who excelled academically, but her true passion lay in the arts. She was a talented dancer, and music was her life. She exhibited her love for dance and music by joining the school's cheerleading team. She loved to sketch, paint, and create works of art that could express her innermost feelings. Sara was a caring sister to her younger brother Andrew, and always made time for him, even when she was busy with her own interests. She was the kind of person who would go out of her way to help someone in need. Her friends described her as a beautiful person inside and out, and her teachers adored her for her hard-working attitude and dedication to her studies. The day of the murder, in the cold morning of 14th December 1991, Sara Yarbourough woke up with excitement bubbling inside her. It was the day of the drill competition, and she had been looking forward to this day for weeks. She got dressed in her cheerleading outfit, put on some music, and started doing her hair. After getting ready, she got into her car and drove to Federal Way High School. As she pulled into the parking lot, she saw her teammates gathered around the bus, chatting and laughing. She parked her car and walked over to join them, feeling happy and excited. However, things took a dark turn soon after. On December 14, 1991, Sara did not make it onto the school bus scheduled to leave Federal Way High School at 9:30 a.m. Her body was discovered by two boys who were cutting through the campus and saw a man pop out of the bushes and quickly walk away, tossing glances over his shoulder at them. As they passed by, they saw Sara's body lying in a brushy area near the school's tennis courts, just 150 feet away from where her parked car was located. The boys ran back to one boy's house to alert his parents. One boy's father drove to the school and immediately called 911, leading to a large-scale police response. The police quickly realized that they were dealing with a horrific crime and immediately began gathering evidence from the crime scene. Detective Jim Doyon, the lead investigator in her murder case, felt a deep sense of responsibility to find justice for her. He led the investigation, and the King County Sheriff's Department took charge of the case. The police recovered DNA from the scene, including semen stains on Sara's clothing and DNA from underneath her fingernails. However, the DNA did not match anyone in their database. Despite hundreds of individuals being swabbed, the case remained unsolved for many years. The police also examined Sara's cell phone and vehicle, but found no significant information. Jody Sass, a DNA scientist at the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab, worked tirelessly on the case, along with other investigators and scientists. The case had all the solvability factors that investigators could ask for, including a single-source male DNA profile and two eyewitnesses who provided a sketch and a detailed description of the suspect they had seen leaving the crime scene. The King County Sheriff's Department immediately started a search for the suspect and circulated 2 composite sketches of a possible suspect in the local media, hoping that someone would recognize him. The sketches depicted a man in his 20s at the time of the attack, with shoulder-length blonde hair. He was described as wearing a black trench coat and driving a 1970 tan Chevrolet Nova-style car. The police also shared details of the man's physical appearance and other information they had gathered from the scene. Despite the police's best efforts, the sketches did not lead to the identification of a suspect, and a name was never put to the sketch. The lack of a suspect meant that the case remained unsolved for many years, causing anguish to Sara's family and friends. The case continued to receive media coverage, and the police continued to appeal for information, but no new leads emerged. The case went cold for 30 years. As Sara's younger brother Andrew ran around the field, kicking the ball with his teammates, he had no idea that his world was about to shatter into a million pieces. His mind was consumed with the game, unaware that just a few miles away, his sister was taking her last breaths. As the game progressed, the police arrived at the field. Andrew's parents were pulled aside and given the news that would change their lives forever. Meanwhile, Andrew continued to play, completely unaware of the tragedy that had befallen his family. It was only later, when he returned home, that the full extent of the situation became clear. Sara's absence felt like a gaping hole in the heart of the family. Andrew was left to grapple with the knowledge that his beloved sister was gone forever, taken from him by an unknown assailant in a senseless act of violence. After the case had lain cold for 30 years, the investigation started again upon finding a new twist. The connection between the Yarbourough case and the Mayflower Fullers is a fascinating one, and it highlights the power of genetic genealogy in solving cold cases. The Fuller YSTR Surname Project was a group of descendants of Robert Fuller, who arrived in Salem, Massachusetts in the 1630s, and were relatives of the Mayflower Fullers. The project consisted of individuals who share the Fuller surname and had undergone YSTR testing, which analyzes short tandem repeats on the Y chromosome that are passed down from father to son. When identifiers began working on the Yarbourough case in 2011, they searched the YSTR database and found a match between the killer's YSTR profile and members of the Fuller Project. This led investigators to William Fuller, a longtime friend of the Yarbourough family, who had been in the area at the time of the murder. Fuller's daughter Elizabeth was also a classmate of Sara's. William Fuller voluntarily gave a DNA sample, which was compared to the crime scene DNA. It was determined that he was not the killer, nor was he the father of the killer. However, his YSTR profile matched the Y profile from the crime scene DNA, indicating he was a paternal cousin of the killer. This was an important breakthrough in the case because it allowed authorities to trace the killer's genealogy back to the 1600s, even though the killer himself was still unknown. Investigators looked into other Fullers in the area, but the case went cold again. It wasn't until 2019 that the case saw a breakthrough when DNA evidence found at the scene was matched to a profile in the National Combined DNA Index System, or CODIS database. This match identified Patrick Leon Nicholas as a potential suspect in the case. CODIS is a large computer database that enables federal, state, and local forensic laboratories to exchange and compare DNA profiles electronically, linking violent crimes to each other and to known offenders. The DNA match was achieved using autosomal SNP testing, which analyzes single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNPs, throughout an individual's genome to identify potential relatives. Patrick Neon Nicholas, the suspect in the 1991 murder of Sara Yarbourough, was a man with a dark past. Born in the early 1960s, Nicholas was in his late 20s at the time of the murder. He was described as having a lean, athletic build, standing at around 6 feet tall, with short brown hair and brown eyes. Nicholas had a troubled history long before he became a suspect in the Yarbourough case. In 1986, he was arrested for possession of cocaine and received a sentence of 30 days in jail. He was arrested again in 1988, this time for the assault of a young girl in Benton County, Oregon. Nicholas approached the victim in her car, brandishing a knife and threatening to kill her. He then forced her to undress and walked her towards a river, where she managed to escape by swimming away. He was convicted of the crime and sentenced to 10 years in prison, though he was released after serving only 4 years. Despite his criminal history, Nicholas was never a suspect in the Yarbourough case until advances in forensic genetic genealogy brought his DNA to the attention of detectives. Patrick Neon Nicholas was a man who had managed to escape suspicion for all those years. Despite a rap sheet that included arrests for assault and other crimes, Nicholas had never been on the radar of the investigators who had tirelessly worked the case. But DNA doesn't lie, and when forensic scientists examined the genetic material found at the crime scene and compared it to a sample from Nicholas, they found a match that was nothing short of remarkable. 13 alleles examined on both items were a perfect match. The odds of someone else having the same genetic profile was 1 in 120 quadrillion. It was a revelation that stunned everyone involved in the case. To build their case against Nicholas, detectives put him under surveillance following his every move. And it was during this surveillance that they were able to collect the evidence they needed. 2 discarded cigarette butts and a paper napkin that fell from Nicholas's pocket were all it took. The DNA on one of the cigarettes was a match for the DNA found on several items of Yarbourough's clothing at the scene. It was a long time coming, but finally there was a break in the case. And it was all thanks to the groundbreaking technology of forensic genetic genealogy. Nicholas was finally arrested in January 2019, and his trial began in January 2020, nearly 30 years after the murder of Sara Yarbourough. The trial of Patrick Leon Nicholas for the murder of Sara Yarbourough was a tense and emotional affair. Throughout the proceedings, the prosecution presented a compelling case against Nicholas, linking him to the crime through strong forensic evidence. Expert witnesses testified that DNA samples taken from Yarbourough's clothing and body matched Nicholas's DNA, which had been collected from cigarette butts and a napkin left behind by Nicholas while he was under surveillance. This evidence proved to be crucial in the case against Nicholas. Furthermore, prosecutors argued that Nicholas had assaulted Yarbourough before strangling her to death. They also presented testimony from witnesses who claimed to have seen Nicholas near the school on the day of the murder.
And then all of a sudden Adam said, "There's a girl in the bushes." And I turned and looked, and that's when I saw Sarah's body. Turned back, looked at him. He was now standing close. There was a vehicle parked right around the corner where the parking lot is. Standing right next to that vehicle, grabbed Adam and said, "Run," ran back to my house.
This testimony, combined with the DNA evidence, made a strong case against Nicholas. In response, Nicholas's defense team tried to cast doubt on the prosecution's evidence, especially the reliability of DNA testing. They also argued that there were other potential suspects who should have been investigated more thoroughly, but who were overlooked by investigators. However, the prosecution was able to refute those claims and maintain their case against Nicholas. During the trial, Yarbourough's mother, Laura, emotionally testified about the moment when she learned that her daughter's body had been found. Her mother's testimony brought back painful memories for those in the courtroom, including friends from the Federal Way High School class of 1993 who packed the room. One of Sarah's friends, Shannon Grant, testified about driving by the school and seeing police caution tape after the murder. The trial was also a reminder of the passage of time, as many of the original detectives on the case had retired or passed away, and some witnesses had moved away. One of the officers who initially responded to the scene in 1991 also testified during the trial, highlighting the longevity and complexity of the case. The trial was a highly emotional affair for Yarbourough's family and friends. They were present throughout the proceedings, listening to testimony about the brutal murder of their loved one. Emotions ran high as they waited for justice to be served after more than 3 decades of waiting. The trial lasted several weeks, during which time the jury heard from dozens of witnesses and experts. The proceedings were meticulous and thorough, with each piece of evidence and testimony carefully examined. In the end, the jury found Patrick Neon Nicholas guilty of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
We, the jury, find the defendant Patrick Leon Nicholas guilty of the crime of murder in the first degree.
The verdict brought closure to Yarbourough's family and friends, who had waited more than 3 decades for justice to be served. While the trial was a difficult and emotional experience, they were finally able to see the person responsible for their loved one's death brought to justice. The trial served as a reminder that justice may be delayed, but it will eventually be served. The comments made by the mother and friends of Sara Yarbourough are a testament to the lasting impact of her murder on their lives. For Laura Yarbourough, the case had been a constant weight on her and her family's minds. The news of the arrest was both a relief and a trigger, bringing back all the emotions of 1991. The thought of what Sara could have accomplished in her life also added to their sorrow. Despite their grief, they were united in their determination to see justice served for their loved one. Laura Yarbourough said that although they continued with their lives, the case was always at the back of their minds as unfinished business. She expressed that living with this for 28 years had been exhausting, and if the case had never been solved, it would have cast a shadow over their lives for the rest of their time. Pensacola is the westernmost city in the state of Florida. Although not very famous for tourist attractions, Pensacola has a rich history. This city is known as the City of 5 Flags, as it has been ruled by 5 nations in the past. The Spanish, French, British, Confederate, and American flags have all flown over the city of Pensacola. One of the nicest places to reside in Florida is Pensacola, which is located in Escambia County. Residents in Pensacola enjoy a dense suburban vibe, and the majority own their homes. There are also numerous restaurants and parks in Pensacola. The city is a good place to live in, but like all other cities, Pensacola also has its setbacks. The chance of becoming a victim of violent crime here is 1 in 29, which is higher than 87% of the communities in Florida. And to start the year off in 1985, the city of Pensacola was hit by a murder no one could have expected. Tonya Maria Etheridge McKinley was born on January 25, 1961, to her delighted parents, Joe Sebron Etheridge and Betty Jo Atkins Etheridge. She grew up with her sister, Renee Etheridge, now Renee McCall, in Milton, Florida. According to Renee, Tonya had a personality so big that it wouldn't even fit in a room. She used to have a lot of friends, and among them her closest friend was her cousin, Venita Biasco. Tonya's parents got divorced in 1977, and in 1978 she dropped out of high school at the age of 17 and moved to Pensacola with Venita. According to Venita, Tonya wanted to find work in the medical field and started taking transcribing classes along with her. During the initial years of their stay at Pensacola, Tonya married Michael McKinley, and Venita got married to Michael's brother, Larry McKinley. However, Tonya later got a divorce, which was finalized in the late 70s. In the midst of the divorce process, Venita introduced Tonya to a man named Tim Davidson. Although Venita thought they were not good for each other as both of them were hard-headed and often engaged in fights and arguments, they still somehow managed to work it out and started dating even before Tonya's divorce to Michael was finalized. Very soon, in 1983, Tonya's life changed when she got pregnant. Tonya was just 22 years old, but she enjoyed every bit of her days in pregnancy. Venita clearly stated that Tonya loved being pregnant, and she could not have been more ready to have the child. And in July 1983, she gave birth to a baby boy and named him Timothy.
Tonya loved being pregnant. She was very excited about it. Couldn't wait till her baby was born.
She quickly became busy with the duties of motherhood and maintaining her work schedule, leaving her with very little time for herself. She would, however, make sure to enjoy New Year's Eve for 1985. Unfortunately, the first day of the year had something else planned for her. It was December 31st, 1984, the last day of the year, and Tonya, along with Venita, dropped their kids off at a daycare. Tonya had planned a night out with Venita and her husband, Larry, for New Year's Eve. At about 9 p.m. that evening, they went to a local bar in Pensacola named Daryl's. Tonya met a lot of individuals she knew from school and other places while at the bar. Tonya took her time greeting everyone she had met that night as soon as they sat down to enjoy some drinks. Soon it was midnight, and everyone bid farewell to the year 1984 and welcomed the new year. Right after midnight, as they almost finished the champagne, Larry, Venita's husband, called out to them and told them that they should be leaving the place as the daycare closed at 1 a.m. in the morning. However, Tonya was not ready to leave the party and asked Venita and Larry to go ahead and pick up their children. When Venita asked Tonya with whom she would return home, Tonya mentioned that she had a lot of friends there, and she would get a ride back home without any problems.
Right after midnight, when we had the champagne, my husband said, we need to go. The daycare closed at 1 a.m. And she said, just go ahead, pick up, my son for me. So I told her, I said, well, who are you going to go home? Who's going to bring you home? And she says, I've got friends everywhere here. And she's like, of course I have a ride.
Tonya then wished them both a Happy New Year and told them that she would see them in the morning. However, things didn't go as planned. On the morning of January 1st, Venita was preparing breakfast when Larry asked her if Tonya was home yet. Venita replied that Tonya would return soon. But in the midst of their conversation, someone rang the doorbell. Larry opened the door to find out that it was his mother who had some news to give them. Larry's mother slowly started speaking. I have something to tell you. Venita knew in her heart that it wasn't any kind of good news, and she was right. Larry's mother informed them that the police found Tonya's body in an empty lot during the morning hours of January 1st. It was around 3:30 in the morning on January 1st, 1985, when Tonya's partially clothed, battered body was spotted by a family taking their dog to the veterinarian. Tonya, who had been fatally strangled, was lying to the side of an empty lot near a residential street in Peacock Drive, Pensacola, in Florida. The day was foggy and rainy, so at first the daughter spotted the body and told her mother that there was a mannequin lying on the roadside. But when her mother, Mary Lloyd, saw it, she instantly realized that it was without doubt the body of a young girl lying dead on the road. They returned back to their home at 4838 Peacock Drive in Pensacola, and on the way back they saw that the body was still there. Mary reached out for the phone in her house and called the police at about 5:16 a.m. Police officer Kent Franks immediately reached the place and started examining the body and the crime scene. According to his statement, Tonya was wearing a blue dress which was lifted up to her chest and was partially covering her face. Her pantyhose were pulled down and wrapped around her ankle. He also mentioned that Tonya was lying on her left side, and a blood-stained towel was lying beside her. Her hair was covered with dried blood, and a scrape was also seen on her arm. Her body showed all the signs of a struggle and being a victim of violence before she took her last breath. After witnessing the scene, he stepped back and called crime scene supervisor Robert Grant at 5:23 a.m. EMS specialists Mike Brentley and Kenny Richards reached at about 5:26 a.m. and observed the body, and very soon the crime scene was full of officers. Tonya had no form of identification on her at the time of her death, so she was initially taken to the morgue for identification. The identification process started for the white, red-haired woman who was about 5 feet 7 inches tall and about 110 pounds. Captain Henry Wolfe of the Escambia County Sheriff's Office took samples of her fingerprints and ran them through the DNA database, which confirmed her identity. The police interrogated people in and around the area, but no suspects or leads were found from their investigations. The theory that they believed was that Tonya might have gotten into an argument and some kind of confrontation with someone which led to violence. Subsequently, the culprit hit her on the head and strangled her to death. That was not the actual report, but just a working theory for the police.
The working theory was she was in a confrontation with the suspect. She suffered a blow to the head and subsequently was strangled. As part of the autopsy,
during the initial examination process, an autopsy was done to check if there are any traces of foreign DNA in the victim's body. It was found that there were indeed traces of DNA inside the body of the victim. So the case took a step forward, and now the police had full reason to believe that Tonya was a victim of assault and homicide. Through the autopsy performed by D.P. Nicholson at 3 p.m. on January 1, 1985, the cause of death was confirmed as strangulation. 2 fractures were found on the left side of Tonya's body, and some hemorrhages were also found in the laryngeal muscles and epiglottis. A faint band-like mark was also discovered on Tonya's upper arm. Captain of the Pensacola Police Department, now retired, Chuck Mallett, stated that during the 1980s, forensic techniques were not at par with the sophisticated techniques of today. In those days, semen was only identified by blood groups, and in this case it was found to be A-positive blood type.
it was later determined that semen was present on those swabs. The semen in 1985 could only be classified by blood type, and it was determined to be blood type A.
The police immediately asked Tim Davidson, Tonya's ex-boyfriend, to provide a sample of hair for the testing, but it found that the DNA collected from Tonya's body belonged to someone else. On further interrogations with Vanita and the other people present at Daryl's bar that night, the police learned some more important information. Vanita mentioned that on the night of the incident, Tonya met Kurt, one of her friends. She continued that Tonya had first met him in that very bar, when he paid Tonya's bar tab. Kurt was an employee at the bar, and on that very night, Kurt was there, working his shift. Some other witnesses said that they saw Venita with Kurt for the majority of the time, and also noticed them walking towards the front door at about 2:30 a.m. when the bar was about to close. One of the witnesses mentioned that Kurt had engaged in intercourse with Tonya a few days prior to her death, and they were casually seeing each other. On getting this information, the police asked Kurt to attend an interrogation on January 2, 1985. When he reached the station, Kurt looked very nervous, according to the police. In the interview, he stated that he did meet up with Tonya that night, but left with another woman named Danita, who was his roommate Jordan's girlfriend. Kurt also mentioned that he had no casual relationship with Tonya, and he was in fact casually seeing another woman named Faye. However, when Faye was later interviewed, she told the police that Kurt and she were just friends. There were no more questions left for the police to focus on after Jordan, Kurt's roommate, and also the DJ on the night of the incident, stated that he saw Kurt leaving with Danita, and that Tonya was still there at the bar when they had left. Jordan said that Tonya, whom he knew, looked very preoccupied that night. Kurt was let out of the session after the witness reports, but he was still considered a suspect for Tonya's case for more than a decade. The police soon came to know that Tonya moved out of the apartment where she was living with Tim just a few days before the murder. Venita mentioned that Tonya didn't want Tim to know about her whereabouts after she had left. Due to Tim's significance in Tonya's life, the police were quite interested in speaking with him. At the initial stage of the investigation, Venita believed that Tim was the one behind the murder of her cousin. She stated that Tim was violent and controlling, so it would make complete sense if he was the killer. When interviewed further, she even mentioned an instance when Tim forced Tonya out of the house during her pregnancy. She also stated that Tonya visited her sister Renee a few days before her death and told her not to let Tim take custody of their son if something were to happen to her. Tonya's sister Renee believed that Tim and Tonya were having arguments regarding the pregnancy, and that Tim didn't want to have a child while Tonya was eager to have the baby. This was the main reason, according to Renee, behind why Tim and Tonya had split up. In the following week, after the initial investigations, Tonya was buried by her family in the Crane Cemetery in Milton, Santa Rosa County, Florida. By the end of January 1985, the police were left with quite a bit of evidence which might have led to the killer. They had found nylon carpet fibers on Tonya's clothes and also on the towel. They also found that such towels were only sold in a shop called Zaire, but that bit of information wasn't very helpful. They had amassed much evidence from the crime scene, but nothing was helping to further progress the case. Investigators dug deeper into the case and met with more people from the party on the night Tonya died. Tonya's friend Sheila told the police that she had left the bar at around 1 a.m. when she saw Tonya talking to a man named Christopher. Tonya's other friends, Michelle and Gary, also saw Tonya talking to that man. Christopher was then called into the station, and when asked about his whereabouts, he mentioned that he doesn't recollect much about the party, and that he left with a friend to attend another party at a different bar. His alibi checked out, and he was released. The people from that party also mentioned an unknown man who looked suspicious. They stated that the man was tall and thin, had blonde hair and blue eyes, had a pointed nose and no facial hair, and that he was wearing a dark suit and gold-framed glasses. They believed that the man looked about 28 years of age. On January 11th, Sheila worked with a sketch artist to make a composite poster of the suspicious man she saw that night at Daryl's. But even with the poster, the police were unable to find the man. The police were then informed by the bartender in Daryl's that he had seen Tonya with another man named John that night. When the police met with John, he said that he was too intoxicated and didn't remember even meeting Tonya. He then took a polygraph and passed. As a result, the police were again left without any suspects. The police didn't want the case to go cold so fast, so they spread their search for more suspects to the employees of Daryl's. They looked for someone who had brown hair and maybe was the owner of an animal with black fur, as the police had found some samples of animal hair on Tonya's body. And only one employee matched the description: Jeff. The police met with him, and he stated that the night of New Year's was his first day of work at Daryl's, and he was a dishwasher. He continued saying that he just had $2 that night, so he bought a beer and went home at about 1 a.m. He said that his family wouldn't be able to confirm the time he reached home as they were sleeping. So in order to prove his innocence, Jeff agreed to take a polygraph on March 12th. But later on, after discussing the matter with his lawyer, he decided not to take the test as it could be interpreted differently, according to the polygrapher's experience. The police then asked Jeff to attend an interview on March 15th. He reached the station at about 1 p.m. Jeff looked nervous, and he changed his statement by saying that his father was awake when he reached home that night. He also agreed to take the polygraph, but stopped the process midway. The police stated that he became very hostile during the lie detection test. On March 20th, 1985, the investigators went to Jeff's house to talk to his mother. They asked for her permission to collect some hair samples of their pet and explained that they wanted to release Jeff from any suspicion, but Jeff was making the process hard for them. However, Jeff's mother refused to let them take any samples. Later, on April 29th, the police got a search warrant for Jeff's house and they executed an exhaustive search. They amassed different samples from Jeff's belongings, his Toyota car, and additionally amassed hair samples from his 3 pet dogs and 3 cats. Furthermore, Jeff agreed to give hair samples from his head and pubic region to the police. All the samples were then sent to the FBI, but none of them matched with the evidence of the case. Jeff was then released from suspicion. The investigation was executed at full swing, and many other suspects were brought into the case, but no suspects were found guilty through DNA testing. Although some new leads popped up after a year or so, the police were not any closer to the conclusion, and the case was soon about to get cold. After the reports of Renee and Vanita against Tim, the police believed that Tim could really be the main suspect. In addition to Renee and Vanita's statements, Larry weighed in and stated in an interview that he once saw Tim bumping Tonya with his truck and knocking her to the ground. This really was a very interesting clue, as Tonya's body showed signs of being run over by a vehicle. Now the police were even more suspicious of Tim. Vanita even added that Tim didn't look like he was grieving, and had been drinking alcohol from a flask that he hid in his coat during the funeral. Vanita also told police that Tim was planning on getting rid of Tonya's belongings from the apartment almost immediately, instead of mourning her demise. 10 years after her death, in 1995, an affidavit stated that Tonya died due to blunt force trauma. It continued to say that her heart had ceased very soon after she was hit on the head, so the bleeding was not extravagant. Some other reports by the doctors stated that there were many scrape marks found on Tonya's body, which indicated that she might have been pushed, pulled, or dragged through a hard surface. There were also superficial injuries on her body, which might have happened due to forceful removal of her pantyhose. On further examination by the doctors, 4 strands of black-colored hair were collected from Tonya's back. 3 strands were found in the teeth area, along with a 2-centimeter-long piece of fiber. Similar hair samples were also found on the blue towel collected from the crime scene, her dress, and Tonya's pubic region. Some brown strands of hair were also collected from the towel. Tim's presence was then requested by the Pensacola police station for a follow-up interview. In that interview, it was confirmed that Tim's hair color was not the same as the hair samples found at the crime scene. The other strands of hair, when tested, didn't belong to the killer. What's more unfortunate was that the strands of hair didn't even belong to a human, but to some animal which was not identified. And the brown hair sample, when tested, didn't match anyone in the records. Tim took a polygraph, and after passing the lie detector exam, Tim was likewise cleared of suspicion. But even though he was cleared of suspicion, the police were still not totally satisfied, and they dug deeper into the alibis that Tim had mentioned. The police searched for evidence from the party that Tim had said he was attending on the night of the incident. The police met with Kathy, the girl that Tim said he was with. Upon further searching for clues, one of the girls from the party provided the police with a time-stamped camcorder video, which proved that Tim was there the whole time from 1 a.m. to 4 a.m. Finally, Tim was cleared of suspicion by the police. 16 years later, in 2001, after the murder of Tonya McKinley, crime scene supervisor Nicole Heitzelman joined the Pensacola Police Department. Right after joining, she was filled in by the primary crime scene analyst on Tonya's case, and the case soon became very important to Nicole.
Primary crime scene analyst on the McKinley case told me about the case, and it became an important case for me.
She mentioned in an interview that in 1985, there was no cutting-edge technology to test the DNA. So the samples were sent to the FBI, where many tests were done.
In 1985, there was no DNA analysis. So initially, all the evidence was sent to the FBI, and all you could tell at that time was ABO blood group.
But unfortunately, no evidence or leads were found, and the case remained cold for another decade. Tonya's case went cold for another 19 years, but Pensacola police remained committed to catching her killer, and her case was passed around to several detectives over that time that passed after her death. In 2020, with new technologies developed by scientists, Parabon Nanolabs investigators started running old DNA profiles from previously investigated cases against online DNA databases to find relatives of the criminals to make a family tree. Through this system of genealogical forensic testing, the case of Tonya finally had a breakthrough. The genetic genealogical testing found a match, and the police finally had a suspect, and his name was Daniel Leonard Wells.
I got a call at my desk from Chuck Mallett. He said, we got a name, Daniel Wells. I said, let me call you back in a few hours, and I just went at it in public databases, and that stuff going back to the mid-1980s, right after Tonya's murder, very quickly that made it seem like, this might be the guy.
After 35 years, in 2020, Daniel Wells was still living near the crime scene. He was working in the kitchen at Chan's Salon at the University Mall, which was right near Daryl's bar. Wells has had prior encounters with Pensacola law enforcement, including an arrest in 1987 for suspected violence and witness tampering, according to court records obtained by the Pensacola News-Journal. He pleaded no contest to the first charge, and the second charge was also eventually dropped. Wells was detained for allegedly soliciting prostitutes a year later in 1988, but it's unknown how the case turned out. Using the DNA database of Parabon Nanolabs, Pensacola authorities were able to match DNA evidence found at Tonya's crime scene and on her body, with several different people who were believed to be Wells' distant cousins. After the match, authorities constructed a family tree, starting with the distant relatives to determine possible suspects. Eventually, authorities said the tree led them to identify Wells as a suspect. They said that they were ultimately able to match Wells' DNA, which was collected from a discarded cigarette butt, to the evidence found in Tonya's body all those years ago. On March 18, 2020, 57-year-old Daniel Leonard Wells was arrested for the 1985 slaying of Tonya McKinley.
I remember that her friends had left her, and she wanted a ride home. I think I hit her in the head, and it knocked her out. And it was a traumatic blow, and it killed her.
take her out, you put her in a truck, you drive around, and pushed her out and dumped her on the side of the road.
Yeah, like a bag of trash, man.
Wells was held without bond, and he faced charges of first-degree murder and first-degree assault. He was set for his first trial on March 18, 2020, where he pleaded not guilty. March 24th was then set as the date for another trial, but all was rendered moot when Wells was found dead in his cell at the Escambia County Jail in Florida on March 19, 2020. He took his own life in his cell before he could face further trials. According to Tonya's son, Timothy Jr., who was 36 at the time, Wells was a coward who couldn't even face the trial. All he wanted was justice for his mother, and wanted to see his mother finally rest in peace.
When I found out that he committed suicide, I felt very, very cheated. How different would my life be if she was never taken from me?
Although the killer took his own life before justice was commenced, one might feel that Tonya did get some kind of justice after all. Nestled on the southwestern side of Dallas, Texas, lies a neighborhood with a unique charm and character, Oak Cliff. This vibrant community boasts a fusion of eclectic cultures, diverse architecture, and natural beauty that exudes an undeniable charm. As you enter Oak Cliff, you are greeted by a kaleidoscope of colors that adorn the streets and buildings. From the stunning murals that line the walls to the quirky boutiques and vibrant markets, there is no shortage of eye-catching sights to behold. Oak Cliff is a place where people know their neighbors and take pride in their community. Its population of over 64,000 is made up of a diverse group of individuals, each with their own unique story to tell. From artists to entrepreneurs, the neighborhood is home to people from all walks of life. But it was here, in this seemingly peaceful neighborhood, that a horrible crime took place in 1989. Mary Hague Kelly was a woman who lived a long and fulfilling life at her residence in North Francis Street in Oak Cliff, Dallas. She was born in Clarksville, Texas on May 5, 1911, to her parents, John and Lulu Mae Hague. Mary grew up with two brothers, John Jr. and Richard, and a sister, Maddie. From a young age, Mary had a passion for learning, which she would carry with her throughout her life. Mary attended East Texas State Teachers College, which is now known as Texas A&M University Commerce. In 1931, she graduated with a degree in education and went on to teach at several schools in the Dallas area. Mary's teaching career spanned over 30 years in the Dallas Independent School District, where she was loved by her students for her kindness and compassion. Mary never married and had no children of her own. She lived alone in an apartment at Villa de Oro complex in Oak Cliff, a neighborhood in Dallas. Mary was known for being a private person who kept to herself, but she was friendly with her neighbors and would often stop to chat with them. By 1989, Mary was 78 years old. She had been retired for several years, but still kept in touch with many of her former students. She was a beloved member of the community and had a reputation for being a kind and caring person. But little did anyone know that a tragic event was waiting for her just around the corner. On the chilly winter day of January 19, 1989, the Dallas Police Department received a distressing call. A concerned relative of Mary Hague Kelly had used his own key to enter her residence after being unable to get in touch with her. Upon entering, he was met with a horrifying sight. Mary Hague Kelly was found dead, naked from the waist down, shoved underneath her bed. The relative immediately called the police, and patrol officers rushed to the scene. As the officers arrived on the scene, they were met with a tense atmosphere. The home was quiet, yet the sense of unease was palpable. The relative who had discovered Mary's body was waiting outside, his face etched with worry and grief. The officers entered the residence, apprehensive about what they might find. The officers' eyes were immediately drawn to the bed, where they saw Mary Hague Kelly's lifeless body shoved underneath the bed. She lay there naked from the waist down, as if someone had been there with her and taken advantage of her vulnerable state. The sight of her limp, cold body was an image that would stay with the officers for a long time to come. Mary Hague Kelly's murder sent shockwaves through the Oak Cliff community. Everyone who knew her, from her former students to her neighbors, was devastated by her untimely and violent death. Mary was known for her gentle and caring personality, and the idea that someone could do something so heinous to her was almost unbearable. The post-mortem examination revealed that Mary had been strangled to death, her life taken by someone who had no regard for her humanity. Some items missing from her home indicated that a burglary had taken place, but the absence of forced entry was puzzling. How had the perpetrator gotten into Mary's home undetected? The investigation into Mary Hague Kelly's murder was intensive and thorough, with detectives interviewing several persons of interest and canvassing local pawn shops for her stolen valuables. Despite their best efforts, no leads materialized, and the investigation began to stall. The lack of forced entry at the crime scene puzzled investigators, who could not determine how the perpetrator had gained access to Mary's home without leaving any sign of a break-in. Prints found at the crime scene were submitted for comparison, but no matches were found, leaving detectives at a dead end. Forensic DNA evidence was also found. However, there was no one it could be traced to. Frustrated and running out of options, the case information was submitted to the FBI's Violent Crime Apprehension Program, VICAP, in hopes of finding similar cases. Pawn shops throughout the city were contacted to check for stolen items missing from Mary's home, but to no avail. The investigation went on for months, but with no witnesses to the crime and all leads exhausted, the case eventually went cold. Despite the lack of progress, detectives remained committed to solving the case and bringing justice to Mary Hague Kelly and her family. After 33 years, the case of Mary Hague Kelly was reopened in November of 2021, when the Dallas County District Attorney's Office teamed up with Othram to explore if advanced DNA testing could provide new leads. The forensic DNA evidence found at the crime scene all those years ago was sent to Othram. And using forensic-grade genome sequencing, they were able to develop a genealogical profile from DNA evidence. With the help of the in-house genealogy team, they were able to produce investigative leads that were submitted back to the Dallas County District Attorney's Office. The investigation continued, and in July 2022, 53-year-old Davis Rojas was identified as the suspect in the murder of Mary Hague Kelly, thanks to the breakthrough that Othram provided. The Dallas Police Department arrested Rojas and charged him with capital murder. The funding for the DNA testing and genealogical research was made possible through a grant from Season of Justice. The grant was awarded to Leighton D'Antoni from the Dallas County District Attorney's Office. The Season of Justice has been a valuable resource in pushing cold cases forward through funding for advanced DNA solutions, like forensic genealogy and next-generation sequencing. Rojas was 20 years old at the time of the murder, and genetic genealogy led to the half-brother of the man whose DNA was found on Kelly's body. He lived next door to Kelly at the time of her death. The police tracked down the half-brother and used a discarded six-pack of Bud Light to match his DNA to that which was found on Kelly's body. The Dallas Police Department announced Rojas's arrest on July 22, 2022, and he is being held at the Dallas County Jail on a $750,000 bond. D'Antoni, Assistant District Attorney of Dallas County DA's office, praised the work of Othram in solving this difficult case, saying that the case would not have been solved without them. This case is a testament to the power of advanced DNA testing and genealogical research in solving cold cases that seemed unsolvable for years. The Mary Hague Kelly cold case is a haunting reminder of the importance of justice and closure for victims and their families. For over 3 decades, the investigation remained cold until advanced DNA testing and genealogical research brought new leads and identified a suspect. The work of organizations like Othram and Season of Justice, along with the relentless dedication of law enforcement officials, played a crucial role in bringing David Rojas to justice. This case serves as a testament to the power of collaboration and cutting-edge technology in the pursuit of justice. While the outcome cannot undo the tragic loss of Mary Hague Kelly, it is a step towards healing and a reminder that no case is truly closed until justice is served. Today's case takes us to Wyoming, a state in the United States of America. Wyoming is a state located in the western United States Mountain West area. It is surrounded by Montana to the north and northwest, South Dakota and Nebraska to the east, Idaho to the west, Utah to the southwest, and Colorado to the south. Despite being the 10th biggest state in terms of area, Wyoming has the second lowest population density, behind Alaska. Cheyenne, the state's capital and largest city, has just over 65,000 people living there. The Rocky Mountain ranges and rangelands dominate Wyoming's western half, while the High Plains, a region of high-elevation grassland, make up its eastern half. As it is divided between semi-arid and continental climates with larger temperature extremes, it is windier and drier than most of the rest of the nation. The federal government owns over half of Wyoming's land, which is often reserved for public usage. In terms of both acreage and the percentage of a state's land that is owned by the federal government, the state comes in 6th. Wyoming is renowned for its extensive indigenous folklore, breathtaking natural surroundings, and magnificent national parks like Yellowstone and Grand Teton. The state has one of the lowest population densities in the country. Wyoming is renowned for bull riding, cowboy culture, and being the location of some of the most breathtaking rangelands on Earth. It is here in Wyoming that Lisa disappeared in 1988. Lisa Marie Kimmell was the oldest of Sheila and Ronald Kimmell's 3 daughters. Lisa had 2 younger sisters, Sherry and Stacy. She was born on July 18, 1969, in Covington, Tennessee. She was raised in Billings, Montana. In 1987, after graduating from Billings Senior High School, Kimmell accepted a position as a restaurant manager at an Arby's in Aurora, Colorado, a town close to Denver. Sheila Kimmell, Lisa's mother, was a regional manager for the restaurant chain, and the two traveled weekly for about 555 miles between Billings and Denver. During the week, Lisa and her mother lived in a Denver apartment building, each in a different apartment, and frequently traveled back to Billings to visit Ronald, Lisa's father, and the other Kimmell sisters. It was the last weekend of March in 1988 when Sheila and her daughter Lisa decided to head back to Billings from Denver for the weekend and spend some family time with the father and the other 2 Kimmell sisters. However, they planned to take 2 different routes on their way back to Billings, as mother and daughter had different plans. Sheila had plans with Sherry and Stacy to go skiing, and Lisa wanted to introduce her boyfriend, Ed Jarosh, to her family that same weekend, so she planned to drive to Cody, Wyoming to pick up Ed and then head to Billings, Montana. While her mother took a flight from Denver to Montana, Lisa decided to drive in her black 1988 Honda CRX and used the surface road instead of her usual highway route so she could reach Cody, Wyoming and pick up Ed. Given the favorable weather, Lisa should have reached Ed's home late on Friday night in roughly 8 hours, but she never did.
Plan was that she was supposed to leave Denver sometime after work and get to Cody to see me sometime late that evening. I talked to her about 4:30, and she was going to be leaving in about a half hour. I thought she'd be in about midnight or something like that.
So the next morning, he made multiple calls to highway patrols. Later, Wyoming Highway Patrol Officer Alan Lesko would reveal that he had stopped Lisa for speeding on the night she vanished. On March 25, 1988, he claimed to have been patrolling southbound when, according to his radar, he spotted a small vehicle traveling northward at 88 miles per hour. He turned around and drove after the vehicle. Near Orange Junction, the patrol officer stopped her. In his statement, he said that she was neatly dressed and seemed the type of girl one would want as a daughter.
I was patrolling southbound on March 25th, noted a small car northbound at 88 miles an hour according to my radar. I turned around and pursued the car. I stopped her near Orange Junction. She was well kept, kind of person you'd like to have for a daughter.
Lisa confirmed her identification by signing the ticket. It was Lisa Marie Kimmell's final verified sighting. Lisa's mother started to worry as she didn't hear a word from her daughter Lisa as the week went by.
As the week went on, we realized the gravity of the situation. The outlook was looking a little grim, but even if the outcome wasn't as we hoped, we still needed to find her.
As tensions rose on March 27, 1988, Lisa's father, Ronald Kimmell, chartered a private plane to check any trace of the black Honda that Lisa drove in with the hope that maybe Lisa had taken a wrong turn and was lost in the desert of Wyoming. Meanwhile, Sheila was constantly trying to reach as many people as possible to get information which could help them get their daughter back. In fact, the Kimmell family made flyers with a photo of Lisa and her description, and also published an article in a local newspaper, with a reward for any significant information that would be of any help. Till this point, this case was just a missing persons case. But just a week after she disappeared, on April 2, 1988, Greg Bradford, a mechanic by profession, was walking past the North Platte River Casper, looking for a spot to fish when he discovered the half-nude body of Lisa floating in the river. He looked over his shoulder as he ascended from the bank, and the horrific sight was right in front of his eyes. Then he remembered that police and media had mentioned a young girl missing from Montana. So he checked again to be sure, and realized it was indeed the missing girl, Lisa Marie Kimmell.
When I stepped up off the side of the bank, I looked over my shoulder and I saw the lady in the water. And then I remember when we were driving up from Cheyenne, they said this young girl was missing from Montana. So I looked again and I said, oh my God, it must be her.
Upon the discovery of Lisa's body, her entire family was devastated, as this was not something that they anticipated. Amidst the mourning that the Kimmell family was going through, they tried to keep their hearts strong and hoped for justice. The Wyoming Police Department left no stones unturned to find the cause and face behind the fateful death of Lisa Kimmell. It was confirmed by Ed Jarosh, Lisa's boyfriend, that he was the last person Lisa talked to on a call at around 4:30 p.m. in the evening of March 25, 1988. She had told him she would be reaching Cody, Wyoming to pick Ed up around midnight. He also confirmed that her number plate was customized with the name Lil Miss. It was a nickname Lisa's grandmother called her when she was a little girl. The location where Lisa's body was found was combed through by police. 1/4 of a mile away, on an old highway bridge, they discovered blood that matched Lisa's type. The police came to the conclusion that the killer most likely resided in the region, since the bridge was so difficult to reach and rarely used. Based on eyewitness descriptions of strange activity, like the presence of a car on the old government bridge and the flashes of a headlight of a car in the early hours of the morning, police calculated that Lisa's murder took place early on March 26th, around 5 hours after she was arrested for speeding. But shortly after this, information started coming into the authorities that made their investigation more difficult. Lisa's car had been sighted, according to many witnesses. According to Sheriff Ron Ketchum of the Natrona County Sheriff's Department, some even claimed to have seen Lisa herself. More than 1,000 people reported seeing the car to the police. Many of these reports even came from police officers. Even some sightings in Canada were reported.
We've had over 1,000 sightings of this vehicle, a lot of them from law enforcement officers, and we were deluged with them at the point that we thought they had gone to Canada. We had some sightings in Canada.
About 10 hours after Lisa was allegedly murdered, there was one of the most reliable sightings. The wife of the county sheriff in the area, Donna Kirkpatrick, stated that she had seen Lisa operating a vehicle in Buffalo, Wyoming. According to her statement, Donna observed a little black sports car had pulled out in front of her around noon on a Saturday. She then became aware of the license plate. It had Little Miss written on a Montana license plate. She then made the decision that she needed to determine whether the automobile was compatible with the driver. She was certain beyond a doubt that a young girl was operating it. She was positive that it was Lisa.
I am absolutely positive there was a young gal driving it. I know the license plate. I know Montana license plates. I saw the plate on that car at that time on that day, and there's not a doubt in my mind.
More than a day after Lisa's alleged murder, according to eyewitness Diana Houston, she saw Lisa. However, this sighting occurred in Casper, Wyoming, more than 100 miles from Buffalo. A car with an out-of-state license plate grabbed Diana's eyes as she was passing through Casper. She noticed a car with a Montana license plate on a Sunday afternoon. She noticed it because she was from Montana. The license plate read Little Miss as she turned to look. Diana passed by, and she noticed a driver with blonde hair wearing a yellow sweater. Lisa was last seen at 9 on Friday night, and her disappearance was reported at 9 on Saturday. She was allegedly spotted 3 times that day, once on Sunday, and again later. Why hadn't Lisa visited her parents' or boyfriend's home if she was still alive? Who was using the vehicle with Lisa's recognizable license plate if she had been dead early on Saturday morning, as the police believed? These were the questions that were bothering the investigators. All of these eyewitnesses and their statements made the investigation more complex. However, the autopsy gave some distinct and significant information to police, which gave them a way to understand the events that led to the death of Lisa. Her body did not exhibit any indications of decomposition due to the extreme cold. She had been beaten, chained, and assaulted before she was killed, according to the autopsy. Foreign DNA was recovered from her body as well. Kimmell's body was investigated by coroner James Thorpin, who found that the victim had been repeatedly stabbed and struck over the head. Thorpin calculated that Kimmell had been held captive for around 6 days based on the state of her corpse when it was discovered. She had experienced several assaults. Police believed Lisa had either been killed at the old government bridge or near there before then being put into the river. This was due to the blood that matched hers that was discovered on the old government bridge. Lisa was buried on April 8, 1998, almost 2 weeks later after her disappearance. More than 200 people attended her funeral in Sunset Memorial Garden. Her death was a shock to her family and a lot of close ones. In October of the same year, one of Lisa's family friends went to see Lisa's grave, where she found a note that created more suspicion. The note was handwritten and stuck tightly on the headstone. It read, "Lisa, there aren't words to say how much you are missed. The pain never leaves. It's so hard without you. You will always be alive in me. Your death is my painful loss, but heaven's sweet gain. Love always, Stringfellow Hawk." None of Lisa's close ones had any clue who this mysterious person was. The incident created more mystery around her murder. Many television programs at the time covered unsolved mysteries, and the Little Miss murder case was covered by many channels. But slowly, with time, the case went cold, as there were neither significant suspects nor evidence that could help police to continue the investigation any further. The Little Miss murder case remained a mystery until 2001, when DNA sampling was explored extensively by law enforcement agencies all across the USA. The DNA recovered from Lisa's body was put into the system, and police were overjoyed when it matched the DNA of a man who was already serving his term for multiple charges. The database matched the DNA to Dale Wayne Eaton, who was 57 years old at that time. He was from Moneta, Wyoming. Dale already had a lengthy criminal record with a wide variety of crimes, ranging from being put in a juvenile correction center for stabbing a woman for a watermelon to getting charged for aggravated assault on the Breeden family. On September 12, 1997, he had pulled over to help the Breeden family whose car had broken down in the middle of a Wyoming highway that was desolated. However, he kidnapped the family at gunpoint after traveling a short distance. 2 months after being detained for this crime, Eaton broke out of jail. 3 months after his escape, he was eventually apprehended in the Shoshone National Forest. Because he had a weapon on him at the time, his offense was upgraded to a federal felony for carrying a lethal weapon. After that, he was detained in a federal jail, where he was ordered to provide a DNA sample. As he was serving his sentence in the federal prison, he killed one of the inmates and was then charged for manslaughter. The Little Miss murder case was reviewed in 2001 to get a fresh perspective on the crime. After finding the matching DNA, the once cold case of Lisa Marie Kimmell was reopened, and investigators started gathering information and evidence that would establish Dale as the killer of this young girl. Investigators learned from Eaton's next-door neighbors that they had seen him excavating a large trench on his property in Moneta, Wyoming, which is about 75 miles from Casper. In the summer of 2002, the location was excavated, and Kimmell's Honda CRX, still sporting her distinctive Little Miss license plate, was discovered. Following that, Eaton was accused with 8 offenses related to the Kimmell case, including first-degree premeditated murder, aggravated kidnapping, aggravated robbery, first-degree assault, and second-degree assault. In April 2003, Dale Wayne Eaton was convicted for the premeditated murder of Lisa. He was taken to trial in 2004. The trial did not take long to sentence Dale. Based on the evidence and witnesses, it was clear that the murder of Lisa Kimmell was done by none other than Dale. The fact that his DNA matched the DNA recovered from Lisa's body in 1988, and the car was found buried on his property, was substantial evidence pointing towards him as the sole culprit. Moreover, according to testimony from a fellow prisoner named Joseph Francis Dax, Eaton confessed to him as follows. Eaton accepted Kimmell's offer to provide him a ride. Kimmell did not entertain the advances that Eaton made while they were driving, so she pulled aside to let him out. Eventually, the situation escalated and led to kidnapping, assault, and then murder. On March 20th, 2004, Eaton was convicted of all charges and was found guilty and given the death penalty. He unsuccessfully appealed his conviction. He requested and was granted a stay of execution in December 2009, despite being due to be executed in February 2010. In 2014, he saw the death sentence overturned. The state intended to ask for the resumption of the death penalty, but they withdrew their plea in September of 2021. Eaton was the only prisoner on Wyoming's death row before being freed from the same sentence. Dale Wayne Eaton was told on March 25, 2022, that he would serve the remainder of his life in jail without the possibility of release or a commutation, nearly 20 years after being given a death sentence. The Kimmell family received Eaton's property as compensation following a wrongful death case, and the structures were destroyed by fire on July 18, 2005, which would have been Lisa Kimmell's 36th birthday. During and after the trial, the Kimmell family all expressed their emotions in different ways. Sherry Odegaard, Lisa's sister, stated that the original sentence should have been upheld. Lisa's mother, Sheila Kimmell, requested that Eaton take a closer look at her and her girls, emphasizing that he hadn't done so in the past. The whole Kimmell family approached Eaton and his legal team. Sherry specifically disputed the defense's claim that Eaton had a traumatic background and had the mental fortitude to survive a hearing on the death penalty. Quote, his health issues don't excuse. His difficult upbringing doesn't. End quote. Dale and the defense attorney Sean O'Brien both understood what was right and wrong, she emphasized. She called him out for backing a felon like Dale. According to Lisa's younger sister, Stacy Pitts, Eaton was not the victim just because he had a deteriorating health. He was still the criminal. Dale Wayne Eaton receiving 3 square meals a day feels so unjust, said Stacy. Eaton did not mean to talk at first. Sean O'Brien, Eaton's attorney, claimed that his client requested him to apologize on his behalf after he spoke with his defense counsel. The family, however, did not accept the apology because it did not come directly from him. Family members of Kimmell claim to feel that they have reached finality but not closure. Sheila Kimmell stated, "This just closes another chapter of a long book. Hopefully, this was the last chapter."